Somewhere in Europe, more than 600 years ago, a small stack of painted rectangles slipped quietly into the world, and almost the moment it arrived, the men who kept order tried to sweep it back out again. In the Swiss city of Bern, in the careful hand of a town that took its own laws very seriously, someone set down a prohibition against a strange new game of cards. Other cities read the news, or heard it, or simply arrived at the same worry on their own, and wrote their own bans soon after. None of those clerks, bent over their ledgers in the cold, could have imagined what they were forbidding. They thought they were putting out a small fire. They were, without knowing it, making the first written record of an object that would one day be studied by scholars, feared by preachers, painted in gold leaf for princes, and read aloud like scripture in candlelit rooms. Tonight that object unfolds slowly, the way a folded map opens on a table, one crease at a time, from a plain deck for gambling to the 78 cards the world would come to call the tarot. If you find some comfort here, you might take a small moment to leave a like or to subscribe, so this quiet corner of the internet can keep its lamp burning for anyone who cannot sleep. And if you would leave your town and your local hour somewhere in the comments below, it is a small kindness. It helps the other restless people awake at the same strange hour feel a little less alone in the dark. Now settle in, let your shoulders come down from where they have been holding all day. Let the room grow soft at the edges. To find the tarot, we have to walk backward past it, into a time before it existed at all, and stand for a while beside the ordinary playing card. For most of the human story, there were no cards. People took their chances with dice, with knuckle bones worn smooth by handling, with painted sticks thrown down onto beaten earth. The flat card, with a face and a back and a secret kept between them, is a surprisingly late arrival. It seems to have been born in China, not long after the Chinese learned to make paper cheaply and in great quantity, and it is possible that paper money and paper cards grew up together, side by side, like two children in one house. A card is, after all, only a token, a promise printed on a slip, and some of the earliest Chinese cards were bound up with money, with counting, with the reckoning of who owed what to whom when the game was done. From China, the idea travelled the way ideas always travelled then, slowly, along the roads that carried everything else. It moved west in the hands of merchants and soldiers and wanderers, altering a little at every stop, the way a story alters in the retelling, until it came at last into the great Islamic empires that stretched across the Middle East and North Africa. There the card found a home, and something more than a home. It found elegance. The peoples of the medieval Islamic world had a deep fondness for games of skill and of chance, and they had craftsmen who could coax beauty out of paper and paint the way a musician coaxes a note from a string. By the time the card came within sight of the Mediterranean, it was no longer a curiosity from the far east of the world. It had been remade. It belonged now to the hands that had perfected it. Europe met the playing card late in the 14th century, and we know it because the meeting left a trail of small irritations behind it. There was no announcement, no grand arrival, no chronicler writing that on such a day a wondrous new thing came ashore. Instead, there is a scatter of complaints. A sermon in one town warning the faithful away, an ordinance in another forbidding the practice, a monk somewhere setting down a careful description of the new game, in the patient tone of a man recording something no one around him has seen before. And here is the quiet clue in all of it. When a thing appears suddenly in the records of many distant cities within a handful of years, and every one of them writes about it as though it were new, that is usually because it is. So it was with cards. They crossed into Europe and spread with a speed that must have unsettled the people trying to stop them. They spread because they were a pleasure, and because they were portable, and because, unlike a painted board or a box of carved pieces, a whole deck could be folded into a sleeve and carried anywhere a man walked. Soldiers played them in camp, in the long grey hours when there was nothing to do but wait. Sailors played them at sea with the lamp swinging. Merchants played them in the back rooms of inns, where the shutters were closed and the talk was low. And wherever the cards went, money followed, because a card game is a natural engine for gambling, and gambling was precisely what the preachers feared. Much of the earliest European record of cards is, in truth, a record of people trying to be rid of them. That is worth holding on to, because the same suspicion, the same faint sense that these small painted things were not entirely safe, would cling to cards for centuries. And in the end, that suspicion would help transform a perfectly ordinary deck into an object of mystery. There is a rumour about all this, an old one, repeated so often and so confidently that it has become a kind of folk memory. It says that playing cards were carried into Europe by wandering bands of travellers who told fortunes for coins, the people once loosely and carelessly called gypsies, and that the pictures on those cards held ancient Egyptian wisdom, folded and hidden in plain sight. It is a beautiful story. It has been told for hundreds of years, and no part of it has ever been proven, while the dates quietly refuse to cooperate. The travellers in question reached Western Europe only after the cards were already established there. As for the Egyptian wisdom, it was invented, as we shall see much further along this road, by a Frenchman with a magnificent imagination and very little evidence. For now, it is enough to know that the rumour exists, because the rumour itself became part of the tarot's history, and in some ways has mattered nearly as much as the truth. What actually came ashore was simpler and, to my mind, stranger and better. A deck of 52 cards, divided into 4 suits, each suit climbing from an ace up through 10, and then crowned with a small set of court figures, the royal and noble cards we would still recognise today. But the 4 suits were not the hearts and diamonds and clubs and spades that most of the modern world now shuffles without thinking. Those came later, and they came from France. The first European suits were cups, coins, swords, and long staves, batons, sticks of wood. Anyone who has ever held a tarot deck will feel a small shock at that list, a recognition like hearing a name you had forgotten you knew. Because those 4 suits are exactly the suits of the tarot, and they are, to this day, the suits printed on the ordinary playing cards of Italy and Spain, shuffled in cafes by people who have never given a thought to fortune-telling in their lives. So the tarot did not begin as a mystical instrument. It began as a game. And the game began with a plain gambling deck that Europe borrowed from the Islamic world, which had borrowed the notion from further east still. Everything that came afterward, the trumps, the allegories, the fortune-telling, the secret societies with their oaths and their robes, all of it was built on that ordinary foundation. 4 humble suits, cups and coins and swords and staves. Before any of it could happen, though, the deck had to cross one more stretch of water and pass through one more pair of hands. To find the true parents of those 4 suits, we have to follow the card back across the sea, to the courts of the sultans, and to a single astonishing deck that survived into the modern age by nothing more reliable than luck. The empire that gave Europe its playing cards was ruled by the Mamluks, a remarkable dynasty of soldier kings who governed Egypt and Syria for more than 2.5 centuries. Their origins are among the strangest in all of history. They began as enslaved warriors, boys taken young from the lands around the Black Sea and the open steppe, converted and then trained from childhood into the finest heavy cavalry of their age. And then, in a turn that reads like something invented, these enslaved soldiers took power for themselves and became the masters of a wealthy and cultivated state, one that halted the Mongol advance when almost nothing else could, and ruled from a Cairo that glittered. It was in that world, sometime in the 14th century or a little before, that the 4-suited deck took the shape Europe would inherit. For a long while this was only a theory, and a frustrating one. Scholars could see plainly enough that the European suits, the cups and coins and swords and staves, had come from somewhere in the Islamic world, but they had nothing to point at. Cards are fragile things, paper and paste and pigment, and paper does not keep. Centuries eat it, damp finds it, fire is quicker still. Then, in the year 1939, a scholar working in the great Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the old seat of the Ottoman sultans, pulled open a drawer and found a treasure that rewrote the story. Inside was a nearly complete deck of Mamluk playing cards, painted and gilded, that had somehow lain undisturbed for perhaps 500 years. It was the missing link. the ancestor everyone had suspected and no one had ever seen. The Topkapi cards are beautiful, and they are unmistakably the grandparents of the modern deck. They have 4 suits. 2 of them are cups and coins, precisely as in the later Italian cards. The third is swords, curved in the manner of the region rather than straight, but plainly swords all the same. And the 4th suit is the one that opens a window onto the deepest history of the whole object, because the 4th suit is polo sticks. Polo was the great game of horsemen across Persia and the Islamic East, a sport of kings and cavalry, and the long-handled mallet was a natural emblem of a noble life spent in the saddle. But when these cards arrived in Europe, in lands where no one played polo and no one had ever seen it played, the players simply had no idea what the long sticks were meant to be. They kept the shape faithfully, as copyists do, and lost the meaning entirely. And so, over time, the polo stick softened into a plain staff, a baton, a club, a rough length of wood. That is why the suit of wands in a tarot deck is drawn as crude wooden poles, sometimes still sprouting green leaves, held upright by peasants and pilgrims. They are polo mallets that have forgotten they were ever polo mallets. 600 years of forgetting, sitting quietly in your hand. The Mamluk deck carried no queens because in that society the court figures were male officials of the ruler's household. There was a king, and beneath him ranked his deputies and lieutenants, the great officers of a military court. When the deck moved into Christian Europe, the players reshaped that hierarchy to match the world they knew, and in time the queen took her place among the royal cards. But the bones of the system were already complete in Cairo. 4 suits, 10 numbered cards, a small crown of court figures at the summit. Europe did not invent the deck. Europe adopted it, and then made it wear European clothes. One small detail from those Topkapi cards deserves a moment, because it shows how much thought was folded into them. The Mamluk faith discouraged the painting of living human figures on such objects, and so the court cards of that deck show no faces at all. Instead, they carry elegant inscriptions and rich abstract ornament. Sometimes the flowing script names the rank of the card. Sometimes it offers a courtly phrase of good fortune to whoever holds it. The cards were decorated, in a sense, with words and patterns rather than portraits. When Europeans took up the design, they felt no such restraint, and cheerfully filled their court cards with kings and knights and painted faces staring out at the player. It is one reason the European deck looks so different at a glance, even though underneath, the skeleton is the same. It is worth pausing here on how such objects actually move from one world into another, because it was never a single dramatic event. There was no caravan of wise men bearing secret knowledge across the desert. The Mediterranean in the late Middle Ages was a busy and deeply connected sea, crossed constantly by the ships of the Italian trading cities. Venice and Genoa in particular kept merchants and warehouses and small colonies scattered along the eastern shores, and they traded in everything the world had to sell: spices, silk, glass, paper, people. A deck of cards is exactly the sort of small, light, valuable novelty a merchant tucks into his chest to show off at home, and exactly the sort of thing that gets copied and sold the moment it catches on. A few decks in a few sea chests. That was all it would have taken to plant the game in Italian and Spanish soil. After that, it grew by itself. Once it had taken root, the European card became a manufactured good, and a surprisingly early example of one. Long before printed books filled the shops, card makers were using wood blocks and stencils to turn out decks in quantity. A carved block could stamp the black outlines of an entire sheet of cards in one press. Then colour was brushed or pounced through stencils, and the sheet was pasted onto backing, stiffened, and cut apart into its little rectangles. Cards, unlike hand-copied manuscripts, could be made cheaply and sold widely. The card maker became a recognised trade in the cities of Germany and Italy and France, with workshops and apprentices and rivalries and lawsuits of its own. In fact, the technology ran slightly ahead of the printing of books, which means that in a real and literal sense, the humble playing card was among the first mass-produced pictures in European history. Hold that thought gently, because everything that follows depends on it. The tarot could only become what it became, an object copied and recopied, carried across borders, standardized into a fixed set of images that thousands of strangers knew by heart, because it was born inside this early world of printed pictures. A one-of-a-kind painting can be admired. It cannot become a shared language. A deck that can be run off by the 100 can, and did. When the famous trump cards finally appeared, they would spread in exactly this way, block by block and stencil by stencil, until a peasant in a French village and a scholar in an Italian palace might hold nearly the same images in their hands and mean nearly the same things by them. But we have run ahead of ourselves. In the world we have reached so far, there are no trumps at all, no fool, no death, no wheel of fortune turning. There is only the plain four-suited deck, borrowed from the Mamluks, spreading through 14th century Europe and troubling the sleep of preachers. The leap from that ordinary gambling deck to the tarot happened in one particular place, among one particular kind of people, in a burst of invention we can date more closely than almost anything else in this long history. It happened in the courts of northern Italy, in the bright, competitive, pleasure-loving world of the early Renaissance. Northern Italy in the early 1400s was not a country. It was a scatter of proud, wealthy, jealous city-states, each with its ruling family, its artists, its own particular hunger for splendour. Milan had the Visconti and later the Sforza, Ferrara had the Este, Florence had the Medici, rising quietly and patiently behind the scenes. These were not sleepy places, they were centres of banking and trade and war, and their rulers spent enormous sums to make their courts dazzle, because in that world, magnificence was itself a form of power. A duke who could stage the finest feast, commission the finest painter, and give the finest gift was a duke other men took seriously. It was in this atmosphere, among people with money to spend and an appetite for clever novelties, that someone took the ordinary card deck and added something to it that had never been there before. The new thing was a set of extra cards, a fifth group standing above and outside the four familiar suits. These cards belonged to no suit at all. They were not of cups, nor coins, nor swords, nor staves. Instead, each one carried a picture, an allegory, a figure or an idea drawn from the shared imagination of the age. There was an emperor and an empress. There was a card for love, and one for death, and one for the great wheel of fortune forever turning. There was the sun and the moon and a star, a tower struck by disaster, a figure of justice holding up her scales, and running underneath all of them was a single, simple, powerful idea about how to play. These special cards could beat the ordinary ones. They could triumph over them. In the Italian of the day, a triumph was a trionfo, and so the new cards were called carte da trionfi, the cards of triumphs. From that word, by a long and winding road through French and then English, we get the ordinary card-playing term that every player in the world still uses without a second thought. The trump. That is the quiet heart of the whole invention, and it is easy to miss precisely because it sounds so modern and so plain. The tarot's mysterious trump cards, death and the devil and the hanged man, and all the rest of that shadowed company, began their life as nothing more sinister than the trump suit of a card game. They were simply the cards that outranked the others. A player holding the emperor could take a trick from a player holding a mere king of cups. A player holding death, or the world, could take it from almost anyone. The pictures were chosen to be grand and memorable, drawn from the moral and religious and cosmic furniture that any educated person of the time would recognize at a glance. But their function at the table was simply to win. We can date this invention more tightly than almost anything else in the tarot's story, and the evidence is wonderfully mundane. In the account books and letters of the Italian courts of the 1440s, the cards of triumph suddenly appear. A secretary records a payment for a set. A duke sends a pack as a gift. A court painter is commissioned to make them. Before the 1440s, in all the surviving records, there are ordinary cards and no triumphs whatsoever. Afterward, the triumphs are simply there, spreading from court to court like a fashion in sleeves. So the tarot, as a distinct object, was born within a single generation, in the middle of the 15th century, in the courts of Milan and Ferrara and their neighbours. It did not drift down to us out of the ancient past. It was invented by people we can very nearly name for the amusement of princes. Who first thought of it exactly? No one can say. Invention of this kind rarely leaves a signature. It may have grown out of the fashion for allegorical processions and pageants, which the Italians adored. In a real triumph, a grand parade staged for a wedding or a victory, wagons rolled through the streets bearing costumed figures, an actor dressed as fame, another as time, another as death, each in a fixed and meaningful order, each following the last. The poet Petrarch had written a famous sequence of poems called the Trionfi, in which love is conquered by chastity, chastity by death, death by fame, fame by time, and time at the last by eternity. A rising ladder of ideas, each one overcoming the one below it. Look at that scheme. A set of allegorical figures arranged so that each outranks the last, and you can feel how close it sits to a deck of trump cards. The tarot's trumps are, in a sense, a parade of allegories that someone froze onto pieces of card and dealt out across a table. For the people who first played with them, there was nothing occult in any of it. A card showing death was not a prophecy, it was a high card, and everyone seated at the table knew it the way a modern player knows an ace is high. The Pope and the Devil sat in the same pack without the slightest scandal, because both were simply part of the ordered picture of the world the game had borrowed. The cards mapped the cosmos as a medieval Christian imagined it, from the humblest fool at the bottom, up through the ranks of earthly power, the virtues, the wheel of fate, the great forces of death and heaven, to the world itself at the summit. A moral and cosmic ladder turned into a pastime, and played seriously and for money by dukes and their courtiers on winter evenings. The game itself, in its essentials, has survived, and this is one of the small wonders of the whole history. In parts of Europe, in France and Italy and Austria and beyond, people still sit down and play trick-taking games with tarot decks, games in the same family as the one those Italian courtiers played almost 6 centuries ago. To those players there is no mystery in the cards at all. The Fool is a special card with a special role in the rules, and nothing more. Whole regions grew up in which the tarot was, and remained, simply the pack you played cards with when the evenings drew in. No stranger than a chessboard. The mystical tarot and the gambling tarot have lived alongside each other for centuries, often without either giving much thought to the other. And yet, from the very beginning there was something in these cards that invited more than play. The pictures were too rich, too suggestive, too heavy with meaning to stay quietly inside a game. A pack that holds death and the devil and the tower and the lovers and the turning wheel is a pack that seems to be saying something about a life, whether or not anyone intended it to. That quality, that faint sense of a hidden pattern waiting to be noticed, would lie dormant for 300 years before anyone made much of it. But it was in the deck from the first day. Waiting. For now the triumphs remained the toys of the great, and the greatest of them were made not with cheap woodblocks and stencils, but by hand, in gold and precious pigment, for the tables and the treasuries of a ducal palace. The oldest tarot cards that survive into our own time are among the most beautiful objects the Renaissance ever produced, and they were never meant to be slapped down on a tavern table. They were made for the ruling house of Milan, painted by hand on thick card, layered with gold leaf, finished with the fine brushes and the costly pigments that only a duke could summon. Scholars call them the Visconti Sforza cards, after the two families whose joined fortunes they celebrate, and they were most likely made around the middle of the 1400s, at the very moment when the tarot itself was brand new. If you were ever permitted to hold one, you would know at once that this was not a toy. It is closer to a jewelled prayer book than to anything you would deal out for a game. The story of the families behind them is the story of Milan. For generations, the city had been ruled by the Visconti, a hard and clever dynasty whose emblem was a great serpent swallowing a man, a device still carved into stone across the city for anyone who looks up. The last of the male Visconti line, Duke Filippo Maria, was a strange and secretive man who governed from behind locked doors and trusted almost nobody. He left no legitimate son, only a daughter, Bianca Maria. And when she married a brilliant soldier of fortune named Francesco Sforza, the two names and the two coats of arms were bound together. Francesco, a commoner who had climbed by the sword, took Milan after his father-in-law's death and made himself its duke, founding a new dynasty upon the bones of the old one. The finest of the surviving packs seems to have been made to mark exactly that union. Look closely at the cards and you will find the emblems of both houses woven quietly into the pictures, tucked into a border resting on a shield. A private celebration of a marriage that changed a city, painted small enough to hold in one hand. The artist is usually thought to have been a court painter named Bonifacio Bembo, though, as with so much in this history, the attribution is a careful guess rather than a settled fact. What is not in question is the quality of the work. The figures stand in flowing robes of red and blue and gold, their faces calm and courtly, set against backgrounds tooled with delicate patterns pressed into the metal leaf, so that the light moves across them as the card turns. The Empress and the Emperor wear real crowns of a real fashion. The knights ride real horses in real armour. These were portraits, in a way, of the ideal court, painted for people who lived in an actual one and would have known the difference. Because they were made by hand rather than by block, no two of these luxury decks were quite alike, and only a scattered few survive at all, spread now between museums and libraries in Milan and Bergamo and New York, resting in climate-controlled drawers 6 centuries from the fingers that first dealt them. To feel why such a deck mattered, it helps to picture the world it lived in and the sharp lines drawn between the people who filled it. Renaissance Milan, like all of Europe then, was a society built in careful layers, and every person knew precisely which layer was theirs. At the top sat the Duke and the great noble families. They lived in stone palaces with painted halls, wore silk and velvet and furs, dyed in colours that lesser people were sometimes forbidden by law to wear, and they ate astonishingly. A great feast at such a court might run to a dozen courses. Roasted peacocks dressed again in their own feathers so that they arrived at the table looking alive. Whole boars, sturgeon and eels, sweet spiced dishes heavy with imported sugar and cinnamon and pepper, wine flowing through all of it, the whole performance staged far more for display than for hunger. These were people with the leisure to hunt with hawks and hounds, to dance, to keep musicians on hand, and to spend a slow winter afternoon playing with hand-painted cards of gold. Below them came a broad and rising middling sort, the merchants and bankers and master craftsmen who were making the Italian cities rich. A prosperous merchant lived well in a tall townhouse with servants, dressed in good wool and fine linen, ate meat often, bread of white flour, cheese, vegetables carried in from the market that morning. This was the class quietly remaking Europe, the class of the account book and the workshop, ambitious, literate, proud. And it was among these people, as much as among the nobles, that ordinary printed cards found their most eager market. Then, beneath everyone, came the great mass of the people, the labourers and servants and peasants who did the actual work of the world. They lived in one room, or two if fortune smiled, wore rough, undyed wool and wooden clogs, and ate, day upon day upon day, a plain diet built on bread and porridge and pottage, that thick soup of grains and beans and whatever greens the season offered. Meat was a rare brightness kept for a feast day. Their year turned with the harvest. Their pleasures were the tavern, the fair, the saint's day. A deck of gold-leaf cards belonged to a world as distant from their hands as the moon, and yet cards had a way of crossing those lines that almost nothing else did. The very same game a duke played with a jewelled deck, a soldier or a shopkeeper could play with a cheap printed one, and the pictures on the trumps were largely the same pictures. This is part of what makes the tarot such an unusual survivor. It began at the very summit of society, a luxury of princes, and yet its structure passed almost unchanged down into the cheap decks that anyone could afford, so that the emperor and death and the wheel of fortune became common property, images known across every rung of a very rigid ladder. Few objects in that world moved so freely up and down it. The hand-painted decks, for all their beauty, tell us something slightly frustrating as well. Because they were made one at a time for wealthy patrons, they were not consistent. Different courts favoured different figures, different numbers of trumps, different orderings. Some early packs seem to have carried extra cards, allegories of virtues or of famous men, that later quietly dropped away and were never missed. The tarot in these first decades was still soft, still unfixed, more a family of related ideas than a single standard object. A deck made in Ferrara might not match a deck made in Milan or Bologna. It was a thing in the process of becoming itself, and it would only harden into a fixed and recognizable form once it left the world of the hand painter and entered the world of the print shop, where a design could be carved once and copied 10,000 times. For that, the tarot needed to do two things. It needed to become cheaper, and it needed to travel. Both happened across the following century as the game spread out from its cradle in the northern courts, moved down through society, and slipped across borders. It went south and it went north, and above all it went west, over the mountains and into France, where it would find the form that most of the world still pictures when it hears the word tarot. Once the tarot existed, it did what every good game does. It travelled, and it changed as it went. Out of Milan and Ferrara and Bologna, the game of triumphs spread across the Italian peninsula, through the second half of the 15th century and into the 16th, carried by the same restless traffic of soldiers and merchants and courtiers that carried everything else, picking up local habits and local names at every stop. It was in these decades that the deck acquired the word that would cling to it forever. The players had called it the Game of Triumphs. But around the opening of the 1500s, a new term surfaces in the records: tarocchi, a word whose origin no one has ever fully explained. From the Italian came the French tarot and the English tarot, and the older name of triumphs faded down into the ordinary card-playing word trump. Why the players changed the name, and what it first meant, remains one of the small, unsolved puzzles of the whole subject. Historians still turn it over now and then, offering guesses, none of which quite settles the matter. In Italy, the game became a fixture of court and city life, and it developed a charming social custom that tells us a great deal about how these cards were actually used. Idle, clever courtiers invented a pastime of composing verses to match the trumps. A poet would take the figures of the deck, the star, the moon, the empress, the hanged man, and write a little poem assigning each one to a particular lady or gentleman of the company, praising them or teasing them through the meaning of the card. A beautiful woman might be given the star, a proud man the emperor, and someone the room wished to mock might find himself matched with a smile to the fool. These verses were a game inside the game, a way of flirting and gossiping and showing off one's wit, and a good number of them have survived. They matter enormously to the historian because they prove that in this period the cards were understood as a shared language of familiar images that carried no fortune-telling weight whatsoever. Giving the star to a lovely lady was a compliment. It was not a prophecy. Nobody at that table thought they were seeing her future. The deck, spreading through these years, was not yet perfectly uniform, but it was settling towards something. Most versions carried the 4 suits of cups, coins, swords, and staves, each with 10 numbered cards and 4 court figures, and above them a set of trumps and the odd unnumbered figure of the fool. In many places, the trumps came to number 21, with the fool making a 22nd special card that belonged to no suit, outranked nothing, and yet could not quite be captured either. 4 suits of 14, plus 21 trumps, plus the fool. 78 cards. That is the number the world would eventually fix upon as the true and proper size of a tarot deck. But it took time to harden, and in the early days a deck bought in one city might not match a deck bought in the next. As the game crossed the Alps into France and the German lands, it met new tastes and new fashions. The French in particular took to it, and it is in France, over the following centuries, that the tarot would find both its most enduring printed form and, very much later, its strange second life as an instrument of fortune-telling. But that second life lay far ahead. To the French players of the 15 and 1600s, the tarot was a game, a good and faintly aristocratic game, and they played it with real appetite. Being practical people, they also began to simplify and cheapen the pictures for mass production, trading the gold leaf and the fine painting of the Italian courts for bold black outlines and flat stenciled colour that a workshop could turn out by the hundred before the light failed. Everywhere the cards went, they carried the old shadow along with them. Preachers went on denouncing card games as snares of idleness and greed. City governments went on passing and repassing again their laws against gambling, which tells us two things at once: that the laws existed and that nobody obeyed them. There is a certain comedy in that endless stream of ordinances against cards and dice, solemnly renewed decade after decade, each one standing as proof that the last one failed. The authorities of that age were forever forbidding a pleasure that the entire population, from the duke down to the stable boy, plainly had no intention of surrendering. If the bans had worked, there would have been no need to keep writing them. The players developed customs around their games that seem strange to us now. In many places, gambling was hedged about with elaborate rules meant to limit the damage, so that a man might be legally permitted to lose only a fixed small sum in an evening, or forbidden to play at all during certain holy seasons, or required to play only in licensed rooms under a watchful eye. In some towns, the trade of card-making was itself supervised and taxed by authorities who could not stamp the cards out, and so decided to profit from them instead, licensing the makers and taking a share. Much as governments would later come to run the very lotteries they had once condemned. The moral panic and the tax collector, it turns out, can live together quite comfortably. There was a darker custom attached to cards in this period too, one that shows how seriously people took the line between amusement and sin. In some places, a professional gambler or a notorious cheat could be punished with a public shaming, made to stand in the market square with the very cards he had cheated with strung around his neck, so that every passing neighbour could read his trade and his disgrace at a glance. Cards could be burned as well, gathered into heaps and thrown onto the bonfires that fiery preachers lit for the vanities of the world, alongside dice and fine clothes and mirrors and every other snare of pleasure. A deck that had cost a fortune to paint might end its life as ash on a cold morning if the wrong preacher caught the wrong city in the wrong mood. And yet the cards always came back, reprinted, reshuffled, replayed, as popular as ever, because the appetite for the game ran deeper than any sermon. By the 1600s, the tarot was a well-established part of European life, a game with a settled enough shape and a spreading geography, strongest in Italy and France. It had a more or less standard structure of 78 cards. It had a set of trump images most players would recognize on sight. What it did not yet have was a single dominant printed pattern to serve as the reference for everybody, the way a modern deck has one agreed design. That pattern was about to come out of the workshops of France, and it would prove so influential that when almost anyone today closes their eyes and imagines a tarot card, it is this pattern they are imagining. It takes its name from the southern French port where it flourished, the Tarot of Marseilles. It is not the work of one designer, nor of one year. It is a pattern, a shared template that a whole family of French card makers used and reused across generations until it became the common tongue of the tarot. The name is a little misleading, because the pattern was printed in several French cities and not only in Marseilles. But the southern port had a lively trade in cards, and its name attached itself to the style and stayed. What matters is that by the and 1700s, workshops across France were producing tarot decks that looked essentially alike. The same figures in the same poses, the same colours, the same order, and the same names printed along the bottom edge of every trump. For the first time, a person in one country could pick up a tarot deck made in another and find it familiar, card for card. The tarot had acquired a face, and it is a face the world still knows. These decks were printed the practical way, from carved wooden blocks that stamped the black outline onto sheets of paper, after which colour was added through stencils by hand. A few flat tones only: red, blue, yellow, green. The result has a bold, plain, slightly rough beauty, altogether different from the delicate gilded paintings of Milan. The figures are drawn in strong, simple lines, the kind a block can hold and a stencil can fill without smearing. There is a directness to them, a woodcut honesty, that has charmed people ever since. The card makers signed their blocks, and so a few of their names have come down to us. There was Jean Noblet in Paris in the 1600s, whose deck is among the earliest of the pattern to survive. There was Jean Dodal, and later, in the 1700s, Nicolas Convert, whose version was so admired that it has been reproduced again and again, down to the present day, in shops he could never have pictured. These were craftsmen, not mystics. They were making a product to sell to card players, and they had not the faintest idea that they were fixing the sacred images of a future occult tradition. What the Marseilles pattern fixed above all was the sequence and the identity of the 22 special cards, the trumps and the fool, which would later come to be called the major arcana. Printed in order, they run past the eye like a procession. There is the fool, the wandering figure with his bundle and his small dog at his heel. There is the magician at his table of tricks, the popess, the empress, the emperor, the pope. There are the lovers and the chariot and justice with her sword and scales. There is the hermit with his lantern, the great turning wheel of fortune and the figure of strength. There is the hanged man, dangling calmly by one foot as though he had chosen it. There is the card called Death, and Temperance pouring water between two cups without spilling a drop. There is the Devil, and the tower struck open by lightning, and then the rising lights, the star, the moon, the sun. There is the trump of judgment, with its angel and its waking dead, and at the very summit, the world. Anyone who knows the tarot knows that list by heart. And it was the Marseilles printers, more than anyone, who set it in that order. Two of those cards carried names that would later cause trouble, and it is worth noticing them now, while they still sit innocently in the pack. Among the trumps sat a popess, a female pope, and a pope, the head of the church himself. To a modern eye, the popess is startling. A woman in the papal tiara. She has attracted centuries of speculation, some of it tangled up with the old legend of a Pope Joan, said to have ruled the church in secret and in disguise. In truth, she was most likely a straightforward allegory of faith, or of the church herself, a companion to the other grand figures of the deck. But a popess and a pope, plain religious authority laid out as playing cards in a gambling game, sat uneasily in certain quarters. In later centuries, in more sensitive times and places, these two would be quietly renamed. The popess became the high priestess. The pope became the hierophant, softer titles that gave less offence. On the old Marseilles decks, though, they stand exactly where the printers cut them, unrenamed and unbothered. The Marseilles pattern also settled the humble numbered cards, the pips of the four suits, into a plain and unillustrated form. On these there was no little scene, no picture telling a story. The four of cups showed simply four cups arranged in a pleasing pattern, with vines or flourishes twining between them. The seven of swords showed seven swords crossed and interlaced. The 10 of coins showed 10 coins laid out in a design. In this, the tarot pips looked very much like the ordinary playing cards of Italy and Spain, and for a game that made perfect sense, since in play, you only ever needed to count the suit marks. Hold on to that, because it becomes important later. For most of the tarot's history, the 56 suit cards carried no pictures and told no stories. They were counting cards. The rich, scene-filled pips that so many people now think of as the very essence of the tarot did not exist. They would be invented, deliberately and by name, in the 20th century. The strength of the Marseilles pattern was its stability. Because the design was copied so faithfully from maker to maker, and from one generation to the next, it created something the tarot had never possessed before. A fixed and public canon of images. So that when the occultists finally arrived, in the 17 and 1800s, to read hidden meanings into these cards, they did not find a blank slate waiting for them. They found this deck. This exact set of 22 figures in this exact order, worked out by anonymous French craftsmen for the card table. Every grand theory that followed, every claim about ancient Egypt or the Hebrew alphabet or the secret architecture of the universe had to be draped over the plain wooden figures of the Marseilles deck. The mystics did not design the images they interpreted. They inherited them from printers who thought they were making a toy. That gap between what the cards were and what people would later insist they had always been is the great hinge of this entire story. And we are very nearly at it. For 3 centuries, from the 1400s to the 1700s, the tarot was a game. Sometimes a magnificent game, sometimes a cheap one, but a game. Nobody of any consequence suggested that the cards held secret wisdom, or had come out of Egypt, or could speak about a life not yet lived. The trumps were high cards. The pips were counting cards. The Fool was a wild card with an odd role in the rules, and nothing more. Then, within the space of a single generation, in the salons of Paris in the late 1700s, a small group of imaginative men looked at these entirely ordinary cards and concluded, with total confidence and no evidence whatsoever, that they were the last surviving fragment of the lost sacred books of ancient Egypt. From that one decision, the entire mystical tarot was born. Before we follow them into that strange and fertile mistake, it is worth walking slowly through the deck they were about to transform, so that we know exactly what they were looking at when the idea seized them. Set the 22 trumps aside for a moment and consider the rest of the pack. 56 cards making up its broad and steady base. These are the 4 suits, and they are the oldest and most ordinary part of the tarot, the part it shares with the plain playing cards of half the world. Cups, coins, swords, staves, each running from an ace, a single mark, up through the number 10, and then climbing through 4 court figures. 14 to a suit, 56 in all. For most of the tarot's life, these were the workhorses, the counting cards a player held and shed and gathered as the tricks went round the table. Each suit had its emblem, and each emblem carried, even in the days before anyone read fortunes in them, a loose cloud of association drawn from the world the cards came out of. The suit of cups, sometimes called chalices, showed vessels of the kind you might find on a table or on an altar. A cup holds, a cup pours. It is the shape of a toast and the shape of a blessing. And so cups drifted naturally toward drink and feast and love and the church, toward everything belonging to the heart and the shared table. The suit of coins, later called pentacles or discs, showed round pieces of money stamped with designs. Coins are wealth and trade and payment. The merchant's suit. The suit of the counting house and the market stall. They carried the flavour of property and the solid material world you can weigh in your hand. The suit of swords showed blades, straight or crossed. A sword is the tool of the soldier and the sign of justice and of death, and so swords lean toward war and conflict, toward authority, toward cutting decision and the sharp edge of trouble. And the suit of staves, those descendants of the forgotten polo sticks, showed rough wooden poles or clubs or growing branches, the tools and weapons of the working man. They gathered the sense of labour and land and country life, of enterprise and open air. These associations were never fixed rules in the days of the game. A player holding the 7 of swords did not think that trouble was coming. He thought that he held a 7, and that swords were his suit this hand, or were not. But the associations hovered around the emblems all the same, because the emblems were meaningful objects in themselves. And when the fortune-tellers came, they seized on exactly these old flavours and hardened them into a system. Much of what a modern reader is told about the suits, that cups are emotions, coins are money and the body, swords are mind and conflict, staves are energy and work, is simply the plain old sense of the emblems, sharpened and written down. The tarot's later meanings did not fall out of the sky. They grew out of the obvious nature of a cup, a coin, a sword, and a stick. Above the 10 numbered cards in each suit stood the court, and here the tarot is slightly richer than the ordinary modern deck, because it kept 4 figures where the familiar pack kept only 3. There was a king, crowned ruler of the suit, seated in majesty. A queen enthroned beside him, who had entered the deck in Europe, since the older Mamluk cards had none. A knight, mounted on horseback, a figure the standard modern deck later let go of. And a page, sometimes called a jack or a knave or a valet, a young servant or attendant on foot. 4 figures. A small household in miniature, ranked from the youth on foot up through the rider and the lady to the king. Multiply that little court by 4 suits, and you have 16 court cards, a whole population of kings and queens and knights and pages, each of them coloured by the nature of the suit they belong to. It is easy to see how naturally such an arrangement lends itself to standing for people. A king of coins is a wealthy and established man. A queen of cups, warm and loving. A knight of swords, a hot and combative young man who has not yet learned to wait. A page of staves, an eager apprentice full of restless energy. Even during the centuries of pure play, the players could hardly avoid feeling that these figures had personalities. And when the tarot became an instrument of divination, the courts became its cast of characters, the friends and rivals and strangers whose faces the cards were said to show. But all of that lay ahead. In the game, a king was simply the highest card of his suit, and a page the lowest of the court, and the play went on. There is one more thing to notice about these 56 cards, and it returns us to a point already made, because it becomes the key to a great transformation still far in the future. On the old decks, the Marseilles decks and their Italian cousins, the numbered cards carried no scenes. The 5 of cups showed 5 cups. The 8 of staves showed 8 staves. There was pattern and ornament, vines and flourishes filling the empty space, but no little drama. No figure weeping over spilled vessels. No one striding across a field of blades. To read meaning into such a card, a fortune-teller had to work from memory and from a book, holding in mind that this number in this suit signified such and such, because the card itself showed only its count. This made the pips the driest and hardest part of any reading, a matter of rote learning rather than of looking. That difficulty is precisely what one artist, centuries later, would solve. And in solving it, she would change the tarot forever and make it far more popular than it had ever been. She would take each plain numbered card and paint upon it a small scene, a picture that gave up its meaning at a glance, so that a beginner could read the stories straight off the card without ever opening a book. The Five of Cups would become a cloaked figure grieving over 3 spilled vessels, while 2 still stand behind him, unnoticed. The 10 of Swords would become a body lying beneath a row of blades. The 8 of Staves would become a flight of poles sailing through open air, going somewhere fast. That innovation, more than any grand theory of Egypt or Kabbalah, is what put the tarot into the hands of ordinary people in the 20th century. We will come to the woman who made it in her proper place. For now, hold the picture of the plain deck. 4 suits of counting cards, each topped by its little court, and turn with me to the strange and glorious part of the pack that sits above all of it. The 22 special cards are the soul of the tarot, the part that sets it apart from every ordinary deck. Even in the days when they were only high cards in a game, they formed a sequence that seems to want to mean something. Later ages would call them the major arcana, from a Latin word for secrets, but that name belongs to the occultists and came much later. To the players who first held them, they were simply the trumps, ranked one above another. And yet the ranking is not random. Read the sequence from its lowest figure to its highest, and you feel yourself climbing a ladder, rising out of the ordinary human world, up through the great powers that govern it, past the forces that overturn it, and at last into the heavens. Whether the first designers meant to build a philosophy into that order, or simply arranged a set of familiar allegories in the way that felt most natural, the result reads almost like a story. At the bottom of the climb stand the figures of the everyday human order, the roles a person of that age would recognize from their own street. There is the magician, who in the old decks is less a wizard than a showman or a tradesman, standing at a small table of cups and knives and coins. A man of skill and craft, and perhaps of sleight of hand. There is the pair of spiritual authorities, the Popess and the Pope, and the pair of worldly ones, the Empress and the Emperor, the mother and father of the social world, church and state laid side by side in the same pack. There is the card of the lovers, a moment of choice and union, and the Chariot, a young victor riding in triumph through a town that is cheering him. These lower trumps are the human comedy, the ranks and choices and glories of ordinary life. The world as it appears to someone standing inside it, with no vantage point above. Woven among them and rising past them come the great abstractions, the virtues and forces the age believed governed a life. Justice holds her scales and her sword and does not blink. Strength, often shown as a calm woman closing the jaws of a lion with her bare hands, stands for courage and for mastery over the animal self. Temperance pours liquid endlessly between 2 vessels, the emblem of balance and moderation, never spilling, never finishing. The hermit walks with his lantern, the figure of solitude and patient wisdom, searching for the truth by a very small light. And, turning through the middle of the whole sequence, is the Wheel of Fortune, that favourite image of the medieval mind, on which kings rise and fall and rise again, the great reminder that no earthly height is secure and no low place permanent. These cards are the moral machinery of the world, the qualities a person ought to cultivate, and the fate that nobody escapes. Higher still, the sequence darkens and then breaks open. Here are the cards that have always drawn the most fear and the most fascination. There is the Hanged Man, suspended by one foot and yet strangely serene, a figure of sacrifice and suspension, and the world turned upside down. There is the card that bears the name of death, often drawn as a skeleton with a scythe reaping figures of every rank alike, the great leveller who does not check your title first. There is the devil, binding his small captives in chains that hang loose enough to slip if they ever chose to. And there is the tower, a building struck by lightning and split open, its figures flung out from the top, the very picture of sudden catastrophe and of proud things falling. This is the stretch of the deck where the comfortable order of the lower trumps is stripped away, where power and pride and even life itself are shown to be borrowed. It is sombre material. And it is exactly the material that later readers would find so heavy with meaning. Then, past the fall, the deck rises into light. After the tower come the three celestial cards, the star and the moon and the sun, mounting in brightness like hope recovering after disaster. The star is a gentle figure pouring water beneath a night sky, an image of renewal and quiet faith. The moon shows an uneasy landscape under a watching face, the realm of dream and illusion and things that move just out of sight. And the sun shines down, in most decks, on a scene of the simplest joy, a child or two children in a bright garden, the plainest happiness in the whole pack. After the lights comes judgment, an angel with a trumpet calling the dead to rise, that old Christian image of the last day and of waking into a new life. And at the very top of the ladder stands the world, a single dancing figure ringed by a wreath, surrounded by the emblems of the four corners of creation. The whole cosmos gathered onto one small rectangle of card. From the tradesman at the bottom to the completed world at the summit, the trumps climb from the street to the stars. Outside this climb, belonging to no rank and no suit, wanders the fool. He is the strangest card of all, and the most important, precisely because he does not fit anywhere. In the old decks he is a ragged traveller with a staff and a bundle, sometimes with a small dog worrying at his heels, walking who knows where, on business he has not explained to anyone. In the game he was a wild card with a peculiar role. Neither the highest trump nor the lowest, exempt from the ordinary rules of capture. A card apart. Later readers fell in love with him. They saw in this figure who stands outside all ranks the image of the human soul itself, setting out on a journey through everything the other cards represent. They numbered him 0 and placed him at the very beginning of the sequence, so that the whole procession of trumps became the story of the fool's travels, from innocence to completion. That reading is late and invented, and fits the card so well that it has become almost impossible to see him any other way. Look at the 22 as a whole, and it is not hard to understand why people came to believe they must hold a secret. Here is a set of images that seems to contain a complete map of existence. The ranks of society, the virtues and the vices, the turns of fortune, death and the devil, sun and moon and stars, the last judgment, and the world entire. It has the shape of a philosophy, even where it was only ever meant as a way to win a trick. That shape is the seed of everything that follows. Because when a small group of 18th century Frenchmen went looking for hidden ancient wisdom, this was the deck they happened to be holding. They did not have to invent the sense that the trumps meant something. The trumps had felt meaningful for 300 years. All they had to do was supply an explanation for the feeling. And the explanation they chose, wild and wrong and wonderfully influential, was ancient Egypt. The great turn in the tarot's story happened not at a card table, but at a fashionable evening party in Paris, in the year 1781, or in the years just around it. The setting was the French Enlightenment in its final glittering decade. A world of salons where clever people gathered to talk of science and antiquity and the secrets of nature. A world of Freemasons and philosophers and seekers, hungry for lost wisdom, and more than half in love with an East they had never seen. Into that world stepped a Protestant scholar named Antoine Court de Gebelin. Learned, earnest, endlessly ambitious, he had given his life over to an enormous work he called Le Monde Primitif, the primitive world, a sprawling attempt to prove that all the myths and customs and languages of humanity were the scattered fragments of a single, lost, golden age of wisdom. The story, as he himself told it, is almost too neat to be true. He arrived one day at the house of a friend and found a lady of the company playing with a pack of Italian tarot cards, a game he did not know. He watched the strange figures go past, the Popess, the Devil, the Tower, the Star, the World. And in a flash, he said, the truth came to him whole. These were no ordinary cards. This was a book, the last surviving book of the ancient Egyptians, the sacred wisdom of that lost civilization, smuggled down through the centuries in the disguise of a common game, so that the ignorant would faithfully preserve what they could not understand. Within a quarter of an hour, he claimed, he had seen the entire secret. The tarot was Egyptian, and every card a fragment of a priestly doctrine older than history itself. None of it was true. We can say so plainly because we now know a great deal that Court de Gebelin did not. We know the tarot was invented in 15th century Italy, 300 years before his party, and thousands of years after the pharaohs. We know its images are ordinary medieval and Renaissance European allegories, the emperor and the pope and the wheel of fortune, drawn from the Christian and classical furniture that any European of the age would recognize on sight. There is nothing Egyptian anywhere in them. And here is the sharpest irony in the whole affair. Court de Gebelin could not read a single word of ancient Egyptian, because in his day no living person could. The hieroglyphs were still a locked door, and would not be opened until Champollion turned the key decades later, long after Gebelin was in his grave. His confident account of Egyptian priestly wisdom was built upon an Egypt that existed only in his imagination, a land of vague and glamorous mystery onto which a man could project absolutely anything he pleased. He read a secret language he had entirely invented into a deck of cards he had only just seen. And yet, wrong as he was, he changed everything. His essay on the tarot, tucked into a volume of his great unfinished work, was the first time in more than 3 centuries that anyone in print had suggested these cards held hidden meaning. He gave the tarot a mythology, a pedigree, and above all, a mystery. And he did it at exactly the right moment, before exactly the right audience. A Parisian public already primed by fashion to believe this sort of thing before breakfast. The idea was irresistible. It took a familiar object and made it ancient and sacred. It flattered the reader with the pleasant sensation of being let in on a secret. And it was, crucially, unfalsifiable to the people of the time, because nobody on earth could check it. Once the notion was loose, it spread like fire in dry grass, and it has never gone out. Walk today into any shop that sells tarot cards, and you will find decks crowded with pyramids and sphinxes and Egyptian gods. All of them descended from that quarter of an hour at a Paris party. All of them built on a mistake. Bound into the very same publication was a second essay, contributed by another gentleman of the same circle, and it pushed the idea one step further into the territory that would make the tarot famous. This second writer suggested not merely that the cards were ancient wisdom, but that they could be used to tell fortunes, and he laid out a scheme for how each one might be read as a sign of things to come. There, in print on facing pages, the two great modern ideas about the tarot appear together for the first time: that it is ancient and secret, that it can reveal the future. Both were brand new. Both were invented in the space of a few pages by men who knew nothing whatsoever of the card's real history. And both would utterly overwhelm the modest, accurate, 300-year-old fact that the tarot was a card game from Italy. It helped enormously that Gebela's own century was already half in love with ancient Egypt. Long before anyone could read a hieroglyph, Egypt hung in the European imagination as the homeland of secret wisdom, the land of pyramids and priests and buried knowledge. The Freemasons and mystics of the day had already filled their rituals with Egyptian imagery drawn almost entirely from fantasy. To tell such people that a familiar deck of cards was in truth an Egyptian book of mysteries was to hand them precisely the treasure they had been dreaming about. The claim hardly needed arguing. It fell on ground already prepared and grew there as though it had always belonged. It is worth sitting quietly for a moment with how strange this is, because it may be one of the most remarkable things in the entire history of ideas. A completely false story, invented on the spot by a man misreading an object he had just encountered, became the foundation of a tradition that millions would come to take seriously. A tradition that inspired secret societies and genuine works of art, and put cards into the hands of seekers on every continent. The falseness did not slow it down. In some ways, the falseness helped, because a plain and accurate history, a card game invented for Italian dukes, is a good deal less thrilling than a secret Egyptian book of wisdom. People believed the exciting story because it was exciting, and the belief, once planted, grew a whole world of practice around itself that became perfectly real, even though its root was not. Count de Gebelin himself did not live to see much of what he had started. He died only a few years after publishing his fateful essay, and there is a small, sad irony in the manner of it. This apostle of ancient hidden knowledge fell under the spell of one of the fashionable pseudosciences of his own day, a healer's theory of invisible magnetic fluids said to cure every ill, and he died in the course of its treatments. A believer in a false wisdom to the very last. But the seed was already sprouting. Within a very few years, another Parisian took the vague notion that the tarot could tell fortunes and turned it into something solid. A working method. A business. And the first tarot deck ever designed specifically for divination rather than for play. The man who turned the tarot into a trade was a Parisian of humble origins named Jean-Baptiste Alliette, who reversed the letters of his surname to make himself a more mysterious professional name. Etea. By the ordinary reckoning of his neighbours, he was a seller of small goods, connected in some accounts with the wig trade and with printing. A man of the shops rather than the salons. But he had a genius for self-invention and a fine nose for what the public wanted, and in the fashion for hidden wisdom that Gebelin had helped raise, he saw both a calling and a living. He had already been telling fortunes with ordinary playing cards before the tarot craze broke, so he was perfectly placed when the new idea arrived. Where Gebelin had been a scholar spinning theories in a study, Etea was a practitioner, building a system that worked on a Tuesday afternoon with a nervous customer sitting across the table. He wrote books. Plain, practical how-to books, explaining what each card meant, how to lay them out, how to read the answer. He took the fashionable claim of Egyptian origin and ran with it, weaving elaborate tales of the tarot's descent from a book composed by wise men in a temple beside the Nile. And most importantly, he did something nobody had ever done. He designed and published a tarot deck made specifically for fortune-telling, its images redrawn and reordered to suit his theories, with keywords and meanings printed directly on the cards, so that a customer could use them without years of study. This was the first purpose-built divination tarot in history, the ancestor of every fortune-telling deck sold since. The old decks had been game packs that a mystic reinterpreted. Taylor's was a mystic's deck from the first cut of the block. In a stroke of pure entrepreneurial instinct, he also professionalized the whole business. He set himself up as a reader who would tell your fortune for a fee. He took students and taught them his method for money. He founded a little society of tarot enthusiasts to spread and dignify the practice. He advertised. In short, he built the model of the professional tarot reader that has survived more or less unchanged for well over 2 centuries. The reader with a system, a deck, a set of meanings, and a paying clientele. Every storefront fortune teller, every reader at a summer fair, every modern practitioner charging by the session is working in a trade this Parisian shopkeeper more or less invented in the 1780s. It is easy to be cynical about him, and plenty of people were in his own day and long after. To the serious occultists who came later, he was an embarrassment. A vulgar tradesman who had cheapened a sacred mystery by hanging a price tag on it and printing crib notes along the edges. They sneered at his scholarship, which was indeed largely invented, and at his commercialism, which was frank and entirely unashamed. And yet it is worth being fair to him, because his instincts about people were sounder than the scholars were. Taylor understood that most of those who came to the cards did not want a philosophy of the primitive world. They wanted to know whether they would marry, whether money was coming, whether the sick one would recover, whether the absent one would come home. He built a tool that answered those questions in a form ordinary people could actually hold, and in doing so, he carried the tarot out of the salon and into the street, where it has largely remained ever since. The France in which he worked was moving toward an upheaval that would swallow the entire old world. The revolution broke at the very end of the 1780s, and the salons and the monarchy and the fashionable dabbling in ancient mysteries were all soon overtaken by far more violent business. It is one of the odd footnotes of the period that in a time of such terror, fortune-telling flourished rather than faded. When the future is genuinely frightening, and nobody knows who will be alive or in power by the next season, the wish to lift one corner of the veil grows stronger, not weaker. There is a rumour, often repeated and never proven, that in the shadow of the guillotine a celebrated fortune-teller read the cards for the doomed and the powerful alike, and that some of the great figures of the revolution consulted the tarot before their falls. The tale was told of more than one reader of the age, and the truth of it has never been established, but it catches something real about the moment. In the most rational of revolutions, in the very age of reason, people were quietly turning over painted cards to ask what was coming. Taylor died as the revolution was gathering its full fury, but his influence long outlived him. His decks were reprinted for generations, particularly in France, where a whole family of Egyptian-styled fortune-telling tarots descended from his work. His method of assigning fixed meanings to each card, one for upright and another for reversed, became the backbone of practical cartomancy. And the very shape of the encounter he designed, a client, a reader, a spread of cards, an interpretation offered in a low voice, became the universal picture of what it means to have the tarot read. So familiar now that we forget somebody had to invent it. He was not a deep thinker, and a great deal of what he taught was simply made up. But he was the crucial bridge between an idle theory and a living practice. Gebelin dreamed that the cards were magic. Taylor made a business of behaving as though they were. The tradition he founded did not die with him. It grew into a whole French world of card reading that flourished across the turbulent decades that followed, and its most famous practitioner came a little after him. A celebrated Parisian fortune-teller who rose to great renown in the age of the Revolution and the empire that followed, consulted, so the stories went, by the powerful and the fashionable of the day. Her fame was such that after her death, an entire style of fortune-telling cards was named for her and sold across Europe. A simpler system than the full tarot, but grown from the same soil and popular in parts of the world still. The point is that Eteia did not so much create a deck as open a door, and through that door came generations of readers who made a living, and occasionally a legend, laying out cards for anxious clients. He had turned a fashionable theory into a durable profession, and the profession outlived every one of its founders. For all that, though, he worked at the level of the marketplace and not the cathedral. He had given the tarot a trade, but not a theology. A set of meanings, but not a grand system binding the cards to the deep structure of the universe. That larger and far more ambitious work was taken up in the next century by a very different sort of man. A failed priest turned magician who would fuse the tarot with the ancient Jewish mysticism of the Kabbalah and declare it the master key to all hidden knowledge. His name in the world of magic was Eliphas Levi, and with him the tarot ascends from the fortune-teller's table to the very centre of Western occult philosophy. He was born Alphonse Louis Constant, son of a poor shoemaker in Paris, and he began his adult life walking toward the priesthood. He studied for holy orders and came close to ordination, but he could not reconcile himself to the vows, in part, it seems, because he could not give up the love of women, and he left the seminary without ever being ordained. For years afterward, he drifted through the radical and mystical currents of 19th century Paris, a city boiling with new religions and political dreams and secret societies. He wrote feverish books. He fell into causes and out of them again. He was poor and he was searching. And then, in middle age, he remade himself entirely, taking a Hebrew form of his given names and becoming Eliphas Levi, setting out to be the great reviver and systematizer of magic in the modern world. His central conviction, the one that mattered most for the tarot, was that all the scattered traditions of hidden wisdom, the magic of the ancients, the symbols of the alchemists, the mysticism of the Jewish Kabbalah, and the tarot cards themselves were expressions of a single underlying science, a lost master key to the universe that a diligent seeker might recover. And he noticed something the earlier French writers had missed, a coincidence of numbers that struck him as far too perfect to be accidental. The tarot has 22 trump cards. The Hebrew alphabet, the sacred alphabet of the Kabbalah, has exactly 22 letters. To Levi, this was no coincidence at all. It was a revelation. Each trump, he declared, corresponded to a letter, and to the deep mystical meanings the Kabbalah attached to those letters. The tarot was the Kabbalah in pictures. The whole secret architecture of creation dealt out in 22 cards. This idea that the trumps map onto the Hebrew letters and through them onto the tree of life, that great diagram of the Kabbalah, became the beating heart of the occult tarot, and it remains so today. It gave the cards a structure deeper and far more rigorous than anything Gebelin or Eteia had offered. It connected the deck to a genuinely ancient and profound mystical tradition, even if the connection itself was brand new. And it turned the tarot from a fortune-telling toy into what its serious devotees would insist it had always truly been: a complete symbolic map of the cosmos. A book of universal correspondences in which every card echoed a letter, a number, a planet, a path, a stage in the soul's long return to the divine. Whatever one makes of the truth of it, the grandeur of the vision is hard not to admire. Levi took a French card game and fitted it into the deepest and most complex mystical system of the Western world. It was a construction, of course, and not a discovery. The men who made the tarot in 15th century Italy knew nothing of the Kabbalah and had no thought of the Hebrew alphabet in their heads. The match of 22 to 22 is a genuine numerical coincidence, striking and empty, exactly the kind of pattern the human mind loves to find and then to overvalue. Even Lévy's scheme carried a flaw that would trouble his followers for a century, because it was not at all obvious which card should go with which letter, nor where in the sequence the unnumbered fool belonged. Different occultists assigned the correspondences differently, and their quarrels over precisely which trump answered to which Hebrew letter would fill many pages and divide many societies. Historians of the occult still note with some amusement that the argument was never settled, and probably cannot be. But the basic idea, tarot and Kabbalah as two faces of one truth, was so powerful and so productive that it swept the field, and every serious school of tarot that came afterward built on the foundation he laid. Lévy wrote in a style of thunderous confidence, dense with symbols and pronouncements, and his books became the great well from which later occultists drank. He was not always easy to follow, and he was not above contradicting himself. But he had a real gift for making a reader feel the presence of vast hidden meaning just past the edge of understanding. He drew his own versions of certain tarot figures, most famously a horned and winged image of the devil card, that he presented as a great emblem of the hidden forces of nature. That single drawing has haunted the popular imagination of magic ever since, reproduced and imitated far beyond the world of the cards. Through images like it, Lévy did as much as any one person to shape what the modern West pictures when it imagines the occult at all. He liked to make grand pronouncements, and one of his boldest was that the tarot was a book above all books. So perfect an instrument, he claimed, that a prisoner alone in a cell with nothing but a tarot deck and the patience to study it could acquire universal knowledge and speak with unmatched learning on any subject in the world. It was an absurd exaggeration, and yet it captures the scale of what he believed he had found. A single object holding the whole of wisdom inside it, needing only a reader wise enough to unfold it. That conviction, that the tarot is not merely a set of fortune-telling signs, but a complete and self-contained encyclopedia of the hidden order of things, is his deepest legacy. Every later occultist who pored over the cards as though they were scripture rather than a game was working in the shadow of that enormous claim. His influence crossed the Channel in the decades after his death and fell on very fertile ground in Victorian Britain, where a growing number of educated people, restless inside the walls of respectable religion and fascinated by the exotic and the old, were hungry for precisely what he offered. English translators carried his works to a new audience. English seekers took up his claim that the tarot was the Kabbalah in pictures, and set about working out the details with a thoroughness the French magicians had never quite managed. And out of that English fascination, near the end of the 19th century, there grew a secret society that would take Lévy's grand vision and turn it into a complete and disciplined magical system. One that would produce, in time, the most famous tarot deck the world has ever seen. That society gathered in London in the last years of the 1800s, in an atmosphere of ritual and secrecy and elaborate ceremony, and it called itself the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Its members were not fairground fortune-tellers, but doctors and writers and scholars and gentlewomen, people of learning who pursued magic as a serious study. Within its temples, the tarot was examined more deeply than ever before, fitted precisely to the tree of life, to astrology, to the four elements, and to the stages of a spiritual ascent. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn came into being in London in the year 1888, and although it lasted in its original form for barely more than a decade before tearing itself to pieces, it shaped the modern occult world more than any organization before or since. Its founders were a trio of English Freemasons with a taste for the esoteric, and its authority rested, as such things often did, on a set of mysterious documents. A cipher manuscript, said to have been discovered and decoded, which supposedly contained the rituals and teachings of a hidden tradition, along with the address of a secret German adept who could authorize a new English branch. Whether those documents were genuine or a pious invention has been argued ever since, and the honest answer is that they look very much like an invention. But the order built upon them was real and remarkably serious, and it drew in an extraordinary collection of Victorian and Edwardian talent. The driving intellect of the Golden Dawn in its great years was a strange and formidable man named Samuel Liddell Mathers, who later grandly styled himself MacGregor Mathers, claiming a noble Scottish descent he could not really prove. He was poor, proud, brilliant, and impossible. A scholar of genuine learning who spent his days in the reading room of the British Museum devouring old books of magic and Kabbalah, and his evenings building an elaborate magical system out of what he found there. He was quarrelsome and dictatorial, given to wearing Highland dress and playing the part of a chieftain, and he made enemies as easily as he made discoveries. But he had a real gift for synthesis, and it was he, more than anyone, who wove the tarot into the total system of the order, fixing each card's place among the Hebrew letters, the paths of the tree of life, the signs of the zodiac, the planets, the four elements. What the Golden Dawn did was to complete the work Levy had begun, turning a loose set of mystical hints into a rigid and comprehensive scheme. In the order's teaching, nothing was left vague. Every one of the 22 trumps was locked to a specific Hebrew letter and a specific astrological force. Every one of the 56 suit cards was assigned to a precise region of the tree of life and a precise slice of the heavens, so that the 4 aces ruled the 4 elements, the court cards governed the mixtures between them, and each small numbered card carried an exact astrological meaning, a planet in a sign, worked out to the degree. The tarot became, within the order, a kind of universal filing system for the whole of esoteric knowledge. A deck in which every card was a drawer holding its own bundle of correspondences. A member who mastered it held, in 78 cards, a map of everything the order claimed to teach. The people who studied this system were not cranks at the margin of society. They were close to its cultured centre, and that respectability is a large part of why the Golden Dawn mattered so much. Among its initiates were physicians and clergymen, painters and coroners, and a striking number of women, who found in the order a rare arena where they could pursue serious study on equal terms with men. The great Irish poet William Butler Yeats was a devoted member for years, taking the magical work seriously all his life, and drawing on its symbols in his poetry. The order attracted writers and actresses and doctors and eccentric aristocrats, a whole slice of the imaginative Victorian mind that felt cramped by ordinary religion and by materialist science alike, and wanted something older, stranger, and more beautiful to believe in. These were educated people, choosing deliberately to spend their evenings in robes, in a candlelit temple, learning the correspondences of a deck of cards. Life inside the order was a matter of grades and initiations, each with its own ceremony, its own secret knowledge, its own robes and passwords. A new member entered at the bottom and rose, examination by examination, through a ladder of grades named for the spheres of the tree of life, memorizing correspondences, learning to perform rituals, studying tarot and astrology and Kabbalah and the arts of ceremonial magic. It was demanding work, far closer to a course of study than to a fairground amusement, and it bound the members into a shared, secret world. The tarot sat at the center of that training, not primarily as a fortune-telling device, though members certainly used it so, but as the textbook of the entire system. A set of images to be meditated upon, understood, and finally absorbed. Like many intense secret societies, the Golden Dawn burned very brightly and then blew apart. By the turn of the century, it was consumed by feuds. Most bitterly, a struggle between the domineering Mathers, ruling from a self-imposed exile in Paris, and the London members who had grown weary of taking orders. There were expulsions and counter-expulsions, rival claims to authority, accusations of fraud over those founding documents. There was at least one lurid episode involving a confidence trickster and a scandal that dragged the order's private affairs into the newspapers and did a great deal to discredit it. The original Golden Dawn splintered into competing successor groups, each claiming the true tradition, each carrying off a share of the teachings. It was, in the end, a very human collapse, undone by pride and rivalry rather than by any failure of its ideas. One detail of the Order's life speaks volumes about how it regarded the tarot. The deck used within it was itself a secret. There was no printed version a member could simply buy. Instead, each initiate was expected to make a copy by hand, painting the cards according to the Order's teaching under the guidance of a superior, so that the very act of learning the tarot became a slow labour of the brush, a meditation carried out card by card. A member might spend months producing a personal deck that existed nowhere else on earth, absorbing the meaning of each figure through the painting of it. In this way, the Order's true tarot passed from hand to hand within a closed circle, jealously guarded. And it is one reason that the eventual publication of decks built on its system, first by Waite and Smith and later by Crowley, struck some of the old members as a breaking of solemn oaths, a spilling of secrets that had been sworn to be kept. But the collapse hardly matters for our story, because by the time the Order fell apart, it had already done the essential thing. It had produced a complete and coherent system of tarot symbolism, the richest the world had ever seen, and it had trained a generation of gifted people in that system. Two of those people in particular would carry the Golden Dawn's tarot out of the secret temple and into the wide world, in a form any ordinary person could buy in a shop. One was a learned and rather pompous mystic who had risen high in the Order and brooded long over what he believed the cards truly meant. The other was a brilliant young artist, a woman of mixed heritage and boundless imagination, who could take an abstract meaning and turn it into a picture you could not forget. Arthur Edward Waite took the tarot very seriously indeed, perhaps more seriously than it has been taken before or since. Born in America but raised in England, he was a scholar of the occult with a vast appetite for old books and a prose style so heavy and roundabout that even his admirers found him hard-going. He had risen to a high place in one of the fragments of the Golden Dawn after its collapse, and he had brooded for years over what he believed to be the tarot's true, hidden spiritual meaning, which he thought the fortune-tellers had cheapened and the earlier occultists had only half understood. He wanted a deck that would carry the deep symbolism of the Golden Dawn system, refined by his own mystical convictions. A deck that would be a genuine book of the soul, rather than a tool for predicting marriages and money. What he lacked was the ability to draw it. And so he turned to a young artist he knew from the Order, and in doing so, made the single most important decision in the modern history of the tarot. Her name was Pamela Colman Smith, and she was as vivid as Waite was ponderous. Born to American parents, raised partly in England and partly in Jamaica, she was an artist, an illustrator, and a theatrical designer of real gifts and restless imagination. Her friends called her Pixie. She moved in the artistic and literary circles of the day, designed for the theatre, illustrated books, and possessed, by every account, a rare visual imagination. The kind of mind that could listen to a piece of music and see pictures rising inside it. She too was a member of the Golden Dawn, thoroughly steeped in its symbolism, and when Waite commissioned her, around 1909, to illustrate a complete tarot deck under his direction, she brought to the work something no previous tarot artist ever had: the eye and hand of a working professional illustrator, with a genius for telling an entire story inside a single image. The deck they made together was published in London in 1909 by a firm called William Ryder and Son, and for most of the century that followed, it was known by the names of the publisher and the mystic. The Ryder deck, the Waite deck. Only much later did the world begin to give the artist her due and call it, more justly, the Waite-Smith or Rider-Waite-Smith deck, acknowledging at last that the pictures everyone loved were hers, because it was the pictures that did it. Waite supplied the theology and the direction, and his ideas shaped the deck in important ways. But it was Pamela Colman Smith's images that reached out and took hold of the world's imagination. And they did so, above all, through one revolutionary stroke. That stroke was the illustration of the numbered cards. Remember that for 4.5 centuries, since the very beginning, the 56 suit cards had shown only their emblems: 4 cups, 7 swords, 10 coins, arranged in patterns with no scene and no story. To read them, you had to memorize a book. Pamela Colman Smith changed that forever. On every single numbered card, she painted a small human scene that gave up its meaning at a glance. The 3 of Swords became a heart pierced by 3 blades beneath a grey and raining sky, an image of heartbreak that needs no explanation in any language. The 10 of Wands became a man bowed under the weight of 10 heavy staves, plainly carrying more than he should. The 8 of Cups became a lone figure walking away from a stack of cups toward distant mountains under a clouded moon, an unmistakable picture of leaving something behind. Card after card, she turned an abstract meaning into a scene a child could read. There is good reason to think she drew inspiration from a rare old Italian deck, the Sola Busca, one of the very few earlier packs that had illustrated its pips. But what she built upon that hint was entirely her own, and it transformed the tarot. The effect is difficult to overstate. It democratized the cards. Before her, reading the tarot seriously meant mastering a body of memorized correspondences, an initiate's labor of years. After her, a beginner could lay the cards out and simply look, letting the scenes suggest their meanings, reading the spread the way one reads a wordless comic. The barrier collapsed. You no longer needed a teacher, a secret society, or a shelf of expensive books. You needed the deck and your own 2 eyes. It is very largely because of this one artistic decision that the tarot became, over the following century, something ordinary people everywhere could pick up and use, and that the Waite-Smith deck became the standard against which every other is measured. For all its importance, the deck brought its 2 makers strikingly little reward, and here the story carries a note of real injustice. Pamela Colman Smith was almost certainly paid a modest flat fee for months of intense and brilliant work, with no share whatsoever in the fortune the deck would earn as it sold and resold across the world for more than 100 years. Her name faded from the deck's common title for decades, her contribution overshadowed by the men whose theories she had illustrated. She went on working as an artist, converted to Catholicism, moved in time to the English countryside, and died in 1951 in relative obscurity and financial difficulty, her belongings sold to settle her debts. She never knew that the images she had made would one day hang in galleries and sell in their millions. Only in recent decades has she begun to receive the recognition she was denied in life. Celebrated now as the true creative force behind the world's most beloved tarot, the woman who taught the cards how to tell their stories. Waite did his own part beyond directing the pictures, for he wrote a companion volume to explain the deck, a book he called A Key to the Tarot, later expanded and illustrated with Smith's images. In it he set down meanings for all 78 cards, upright and reversed, in his dense and cautious prose. And though he could be maddeningly vague, forever hinting that the deepest meanings were too sacred to be printed plainly, the book fixed a standard set of interpretations that countless later writers would follow. Between the pictures and the book, the deck arrived in the world as a complete package, images and meanings together, ready for a beginner to take up on the same afternoon. That completeness was rare. Most earlier decks had been either pictures without a guide or theories without good pictures. Waite and Smith gave the world both at once, which is a large part of why theirs, and not some other, became the deck nearly everybody learned from. It spread quietly at first and then irresistibly, especially once the tarot revival gathered force later in the century. It became the deck in the shop window, the deck in the beginner's hand, the deck whose images, the fool at the cliff's edge, the lightning-struck tower, the 10 of swords beneath a black sky, became the common visual language of the tarot for the whole modern world. But even as Waite and Smith were making their gentle, spiritual, widely accessible deck, another member of the Golden Dawn was preparing something very different. A tarot of far darker glamour and far greater notoriety, made by a man the newspapers would eventually call the wickedest in the world. Aleister Crowley was, without much competition, the most notorious occultist of the 20th century. A man who cultivated scandal as carefully as other men cultivate respectability. Born into a wealthy and strictly religious English family, he rebelled against every value they held, and he spent his life and his inheritance in a long, deliberate assault on the conventions of his age. He was a poet, a mountaineer of genuine daring, a chess player, a traveller, and above all a magician who came to believe himself the prophet of a new spiritual era, whose life's work was to overturn the old religions and proclaim a new law. He had passed through the Golden Dawn in his youth, quarrelling furiously with Mathers and with almost everyone else, and he carried away from it a deep knowledge of its tarot system, which he would eventually pour into a deck of his own. His reputation for wickedness was not entirely the invention of his enemies, and this is the place where the darker truth of the subject deserves a plain and level telling. Crowley pursued a life of deliberate transgression, and the British newspapers of the 1920s seized on him with delight. He founded a small community in a farmhouse in Sicily, which he called an abbey, where he gathered followers to live by his teachings and to pursue his experiments. The regime there was harsh and strange, and when a young follower died of an illness contracted at the abbey, the resulting scandal filled the papers and led the Italian government to expel him from the country altogether. He struggled for the rest of his life with an addiction first taken up in the name of experiment and then never shaken loose. He ran through his fortune and much of his health and died at last, poor and diminished, in a boarding house on the English coast. He had spent decades courting infamy, and infamy had in the end largely consumed him. And yet, to dismiss him as merely a charlatan would be to miss the real and lasting quality of his mind. He was also a scholar of magic of formidable learning, and a writer of genuine, if erratic, power. Late in life, in the years around the Second World War, he turned to the making of a tarot, and it became one of the great achievements of his strange career. He did not paint it himself. For that, he found a collaborator as unlikely as the one Waite had found in Smith. A well-bred Englishwoman named Lady Freda Harris, a member of respectable society and the wife of a member of Parliament, who had come to the study of esoteric matters and agreed to paint the deck to Crowley's exacting instruction. What was meant to be a quick project of a few months stretched, under her perfectionism and his demands, into 5 years of intense and difficult work. The deck they produced, which Crowley named the Thoth Tarot after the Egyptian god of wisdom, is unlike anything before it. Where Pamela Colman Smith's images are warm and human and story-shaped, Lady Freda Harris painted in a bold, modern, almost abstract style, full of geometric energy and strange overlapping planes, drawing on the artistic experiments of her own century. The cards blaze with colour and symbol, each one packed with the whole apparatus of Crowley's system: the astrology, the Kabbalah, the alchemy, the correspondences layered and interwoven with a density that can take years to unravel. Crowley also rewrote parts of the tarot to fit his new spiritual law, renaming certain trumps, reordering some of the correspondences, folding in his own prophetic teachings, so that the Thoth is not merely illustrated differently from the Waite Smith, but built upon a partly different philosophy. Neither Crowley nor Harris lived to see their deck become what it became. He published a companion volume, a dense and brilliant book he called the Book of Thoth, in a small edition during the war. But the cards themselves were not published as a usable deck until 1969, more than 20 years after his death, and after hers as well. When it finally appeared, in the middle of a great worldwide revival of interest in the occult, it found an audience he could only have dreamed of. The Thoth became, alongside the Waite-Smith, one of the two most influential decks in the modern world. The darker and more demanding sibling, favoured by those who wanted the tarot at its most complex and most charged. The scandalous magician who had died broke and half forgotten became, in death, one of the great shapers of the tarot that millions would come to use. The contrast between the two great decks of the 20th century tells us something about the range of this object. On one side, the Waite-Smith, gentle, humane, accessible, its meanings legible to a child, made by a solemn mystic and a warm-hearted artist, destined to become the friendly face of the tarot for the ordinary world. On the other, the Thoth, brilliant, forbidding, dense, made by a scandalous prophet and an aristocratic painter, destined to become the deck of the serious adept and the seeker after deeper water. Between them they cover the whole modern spectrum of what the tarot can be, from a beginner's picture book of the soul to an advanced textbook of ceremonial magic. And nearly every deck made since draws, knowingly or not, on one tradition or the other, or on some blending of the two. A few of Crowley's changes are worth noticing because they show how far he was willing to reshape a tradition to fit his vision. The card long called Strength he renamed Lust, insisting that the taming of the beast was better understood as the joyful embrace of raw life force. The card called Judgment he renamed the Eon, tying it to his belief that an entirely new age of the world had begun. He gave other trumps new titles and new emphases drawn from his system, and he wove into the deck the numbers and formulas of his own prophetic book. To a beginner, these changes make the Thoth harder to approach, since it does not always match the meanings printed in the ordinary guides. To its devotees, the alterations are precisely the point. The mark of a deck built not to introduce the tarot, but to carry it to its furthest and most demanding edge. By the middle of the 20th century, then, every essential ingredient of the modern tarot was in place. There was the old game, still played in parts of Europe on winter evenings by people who never thought about any of this. There was the fortune-telling trade a tailor had founded. There was the grand occult philosophy of Levy and the Golden Dawn. And there were the two great decks, ready to carry all of it to a mass audience. What remained was for the tarot to cross the ocean in earnest, to meet the restless spiritual energy of the 20th century United States, and to be swept up in a wave of popular seeking that would carry it further than any duke or magician or fortune-teller had ever imagined. The tarot had reached America long before it became popular there, carried across in the luggage of immigrants and occultists and curious travellers, sold quietly in a handful of specialist shops, studied by a scattered few. For the first half of the 20th century it remained a minority interest in the United States, associated in the public mind mostly with fairground fortune-tellers and the seedier edges of show business. A bit of exotic mystery you might pay a coin to sample under a striped tent. The great decks existed. The Waite-Smith could be found by those who knew where to look. But the tarot was not yet part of ordinary life. What changed everything was a broad shift in the culture itself, a turning of the American mind toward the spiritual, the alternative, and the self, which gathered force in the 1960s and has never entirely receded. The generation that came of age in that decade was hungry for meaning outside the churches and institutions of its parents, and it went looking in every direction at once, toward Eastern religion, toward meditation, toward astrology, toward the whole sprawling territory that would later be labelled the New Age. The tarot suited that mood perfectly. It was ancient, or seemed to be. It was mystical without demanding allegiance to any church. It was personal, offering not commandments but reflection, a way to look inward and think about one's own life. And thanks to Pamela Coleman Smith's pictures, it was easy to begin. A young person could buy a deck and a paperback guide and start reading that same evening, needing no temple, no teacher, and no vows. The tarot slipped naturally into the counterculture's toolkit of self-exploration, alongside the astrology column and the meditation cushion. Publishing did the rest. Where once the tarot had been the preserve of expensive and hard-to-find volumes, now cheap paperbacks poured from the presses, explaining the cards to anyone curious, and inexpensive printed decks made the cards themselves affordable to nearly everyone. A whole industry grew up around teaching beginners, and it framed the tarot increasingly not as a means of predicting a fixed future, but as a mirror for the self, a tool for reflection, insight, and growth. This was a subtle but profound shift in what the cards were understood to be. The old fortune teller had claimed to reveal what would happen. The new reader was far more likely to say that the cards revealed what you already knew and had not yet admitted. That they were a way of speaking to yourself, of drawing the hidden parts of your own mind up into the light. The tarot was being quietly reinvented, from an oracle of fate into an instrument of psychology. That reinvention drew strength from the ideas of the great psychologist Carl Jung, whose theories of the collective unconscious and of universal symbols, the archetypes he believed live in every human mind, seemed to fit the tarot as though made for it. To many modern readers, the trumps became archetypes in exactly that sense. The Fool and the Emperor and the Hermit and Death, understood not as fortune-telling signs, but as figures of the inner life, patterns of the psyche that every person carries. Whether Jung himself would have endorsed the use made of his ideas is a question historians still turn over, though he did take a passing interest in the cards. Either way, the marriage of his psychology with the tarot gave it an intellectual respectability and a therapeutic purpose that the old fortune-telling never had. The cards became a way to think about oneself, and that framing, more than any claim about the future, is what carried the tarot into the mainstream of modern life. The other great force of recent decades has been the sheer explosion of variety. For most of its history, the tarot came in a small number of traditional patterns. In our own age, it has bloomed into a limitless field, with new decks appearing by the thousand, each reimagining the 78 cards in a new style or around a new theme. There are decks drawn from the mythologies of every culture, decks of cats, of gardens, of the sea, decks by fine artists and decks by amateurs, decks reflecting every identity and interest under the sun. The underlying structure, 4 suits and 22 trumps, stays remarkably constant, while the images dressing that structure have multiplied beyond counting. The tarot has become a canvas onto which any artist can project an entire world, and the making of decks has grown into an art form in its own right. Serious artists took up the 78-card form as a challenge, producing decks admired as much for their beauty as for their use. There were decks that reimagined the tarot through the lens of a single painter's vision, decks that set the old figures in wholly new worlds, decks tied to particular cultures and moods and landscapes. A whole small industry of independent creators grew up, funding new decks directly through their admirers and shipping them around the world, so that the tarot became one of the most vital and various forms of popular illustration anywhere. The shared framework gave every artist a structure to work within, and the endless reinvention of that structure has kept the tarot feeling alive rather than frozen in its own past. In the world of the internet and the smartphone, it has spread further and faster than ever, and to a strikingly young and varied audience. Readings are shared on social media, apps deal digital spreads at 2 in the morning, vast online communities trade meanings and interpretations across every time zone at once. The tarot has become fashionable in a way it perhaps never was before, an accessory of a certain modern sensibility, appearing in art and film and design, printed on posters and clothing and the covers of notebooks. Much of this newer interest sits lightly on the older occult foundations, treating the cards as a source of imagery and gentle ritual rather than a system of magic. But the cards themselves are the same cards, descended in an unbroken line from the trionfi of the Italian courts. A reader laying out a spread on a glowing screen is handling, in structure, the very deck a Duke of Milan once held in gold leaf on a winter afternoon. And so the tarot arrives in our own time, carrying all of its pasts at once. It is still, in a few corners of Europe, a game. It is still, in the fortune-teller's booth, an oracle. It is still, for the serious student, a deep system of occult correspondence descended from Levi and the Golden Dawn. And it is now, for a great many people, a tool for reflection and self-understanding. A mirror rather than a crystal ball. All of these live side by side inside the same 78 cards. Having followed the long road that brought them here, from a Chinese invention to a Mamluk deck, to an Italian game, to a French mystery, to an English occult system, to an American mirror of the self, we can at last turn the cards face up, one group at a time, and look closely at what they have come to mean. We begin, as the deck itself seems to want us to begin, with the greatest and strangest of them. The most beloved way to read the 22 trumps is to treat them not as a scattered set of symbols, but as a single journey, the travels of the fool through the whole of experience, from the first innocent step to the final wholeness of the world. It is a modern way of seeing them, invented by 20th century writers rather than by the medieval makers, and it fits so gracefully that it has become the common frame. It turns the major arcana into a story anyone can follow. The Fool is numbered 0, the empty number standing before all the rest, and he is us. The soul at the outset, ready to walk into a world it does not yet understand. In the familiar picture, he is a young traveller stepping lightly toward the edge of a cliff, his eyes on the sky, a small white dog at his heels, a bundle over his shoulder, holding everything he owns. He carries no armour and no plan, only trust and openness and a willingness to go. He is innocence and potential, the leap into the unknown, the fresh start that any life or any venture must make. There is a little danger in him, because he is not watching his feet, but there is freedom in him too, and faith, the sense that the journey matters more than the caution. When he appears, he speaks of new departures, of taking a chance, of meeting the world without the weight of old fears. Every road in the deck begins with his step. It is worth noticing the strange dignity of his number, because 0 is not really a rank at all. The old game had left him unnumbered, a card belonging nowhere in the ordinary sequence, and the occultists who later gave him the 0 were making a quiet statement. 0 is the empty circle, the nothing that holds all potential, the point before counting begins. Placed at the head of the trumps, the Fool becomes the pure openness from which everything else unfolds. Placed at the very end, as some readers prefer, he becomes the soul that has passed through all experience and come round again to innocence on a higher turn of the spiral. Because he is 0, he can stand at both ends of the road at once, the departure and the arrival. And that double nature is part of why readers have loved him more than any other card in the pack. The first figure he meets is the magician, numbered 1, and the magician is the power to make things happen. He stands at a table spread with the emblems of all 4 suits, a cup and a coin and a sword and a wand, and he raises one hand to the heavens while pointing the other to the earth, drawing power from above and directing it below. He is skill, will, and focused action, the capacity to take the raw stuff of the world and shape it toward a purpose. Where the Fool is pure openness, the magician is that openness gathered into intention. He tells the reader that the tools are already at hand, that the moment asks for confidence and concentration, that what is needed now is to act with a clear and directed will. Beside him stands his opposite and his complement, the High Priestess, numbered 2, once called the Popess in the old decks. She sits calm and veiled between 2 pillars, a scroll of hidden knowledge half concealed in her lap, the moon resting at her feet. Where the magician acts outward, she waits and knows inward. She is intuition, mystery, the wisdom that comes not from doing but from stillness and listening, the knowledge lying just beneath the surface of the mind. She guards a threshold, and she keeps a secret. When she appears, she counsels patience and inner attention, a trust in what is sensed rather than what is proven. The quiet voice underneath the noise. She and the magician together are the 2 great powers of the mind, the active and the receptive, standing on either side of the gate as the journey begins. Next, the fool comes upon a pair who rule the world as a mother and a father. The Empress, numbered 3, is enthroned amid a garden ripe with growing things, a figure of abundance, fertility, and nurture, the creative power of nature and of love, which brings new life into being and then tends it. She is the mother of the deck, generous and warm, and she speaks of growth, of creativity bearing fruit, of care and plenty. The Emperor, numbered 4, sits, by contrast, on a hard stone throne in a bare and rocky place, crowned and armoured. He is authority, order and structure, the father of the deck, the ruler and the lawgiver, the power that builds and defends and sets the boundaries within which a life can be safe. Together, they are the 2 pillars of the settled world, the nurturing power and the ordering power, love and law. Beyond the Emperor stands the Hierophant, numbered 5, once simply the Pope, the keeper of tradition and shared belief. He sits in a place of worship, raising his hand in blessing, 2 figures kneeling before him. The great teacher of accepted wisdom, the guardian of the community's faith. Where the High Priestess holds the secret inner knowledge, the Hierophant holds the outer, public teaching, the doctrines and rituals and institutions through which a society hands its wisdom down the generations. He can mean guidance and belonging, the comfort of tradition, the value of learning from those who came before. He can also warn of conformity, of walking the accepted path simply because it is accepted. He is the voice of the established order, for good and for ill. Then comes a card of the heart, the Lovers, numbered 6. In the old decks it showed a young man choosing between 2 women. In the Waite Smith it shows a man and a woman beneath a great winged angel, an image of union and of love. But the card has always been as much about choice as about romance, because the older picture is a picture of decision, of a soul standing at a crossroads between 2 paths. The Lovers speak of relationship and attraction, of 2 joining into something greater, and also of the deep choices that shape a life. The moments when we must decide what we truly value and then commit. Close behind comes the Chariot, numbered 7, the first great triumph of the journey. A victor rides in a chariot drawn by 2 figures pulling in different directions, and he holds them to a single course by the sheer force of his will. The chariot is drive, control, and hard-won victory, the mastery that comes from bending opposing forces toward one purpose and pressing forward anyway. With the Chariot, the fool wins his first real success in the world, and the first half of his journey reaches its height. But mastery of the outer world is only ever the beginning, and the road ahead turns inward. It opens with Strength, numbered 8 in the modern order, a card that shows not a warrior, but a gentle woman calmly closing, or perhaps opening, the jaws of a lion. The lesson is quiet and deep. True strength here is not force, but patience. Not the crushing of the wild self, but the gentle mastery of it. Courage joined to compassion. It is the power that tames the beast by kindness rather than violence, and when it appears it speaks of inner fortitude, of calm in the face of what frightens us, of the soft strength that outlasts the hard. After strength comes the hermit, numbered 9. An old man alone on a height, holding up a lantern with a single star burning inside it, leaning on a staff. He is the seeker of truth in solitude, the one who withdraws from the noise of the world to find wisdom by his own small and patient light. He is introspection, guidance, and the long inward search, and he can mean a needed time apart, a turning away from distraction toward the quiet where understanding grows. The lantern he lifts is meant to light the way for others too, because the wisdom won in solitude is meant, in the end, to be carried back and shared. Then the ground shifts beneath the journey with the wheel of fortune, numbered 10, that great turning wheel on which all things rise and fall. It is the card of change, of luck and fate and the cycles nobody controls. The reminder that fortune turns for everyone, lifting the low and lowering the high, and that it will turn again. It counsels acceptance of change and readiness for the turn, whichever direction it takes. At the middle of the trumps stands Justice, numbered 11, a crowned figure with a sword in one hand and a balance in the other, facing forward, seeing clearly. Justice is truth, fairness and consequence, the law that every action carries its result, the clear sight that weighs a matter honestly and then decides. She calls for accountability and for the acceptance that we reap what we have sown. Beyond her hangs the hanged man, numbered 12, one of the strangest images in the deck. A man suspended calmly by one foot, his face serene, a soft light about his head. He is not being punished, he hangs willingly, and in his upside-down view he sees the world anew. He is surrender, suspension, and the wisdom that comes from letting go, from giving up the struggle and looking from a wholly different angle. He teaches that sometimes the way forward is to stop, to wait, to release, and to accept a necessary pause. Then comes the card that frightens people by its name, Death, numbered 13, and among the most misunderstood in the deck. It shows a skeleton, often riding, moving through a field where figures of every rank fall before it. And yet its meaning in a reading is rarely literal. Death is transformation, the ending that clears the way for a beginning, the necessary close of one chapter so another can open. It is the card of profound change, of letting an old life die so a new one can be born, and though its face is stern, its message is one of renewal through release. Following it comes Temperance, numbered 14, an angelic figure pouring liquid endlessly between two cups, blending them into one. Temperance is balance, moderation, and healing, the patient mixing of opposites into harmony, the recovery and calm that come after the great change of death. It counsels the middle way, the slow work of bringing things back into proportion. The journey then descends into its darkest stretch. The devil, numbered 15, shows a horned figure above two small human captives chained at his feet. And yet the chains hang loose about their necks, and that is the whole secret of the card. The devil is bondage, but it is bondage we half choose. The grip of our own appetites and fears and illusions, the habits and attachments that bind us only because we have not yet lifted the chain away. He speaks of the things that enslave from within, of temptation and dependence, and quietly, underneath, of a freedom that is always nearer than it looks. Worse still, at least in appearance, comes the tower, numbered 16. A tall building struck by a bolt of lightning, its crown blown off, its figures flung down through the air. The tower is sudden upheaval, the shattering of false structures, the crisis that tears down whatever was built on poor foundations. It is frightening, and yet its destruction is a kind of honesty, clearing away the false so that something truer can be raised in its place. After the tower falls, the deck rises into light. The star, numbered 17, shows a serene figure kneeling by water beneath one great bright star and many smaller ones, pouring water onto the land and into the pool. The star is hope, renewal, and peace after the storm. The quiet faith that returns once the worst has already happened. The gentle healing of a wounded spirit. Then the moon, numbered 18, casts a stranger light. Under its glow a dog and a wolf howl. A crayfish crawls up out of the water, and a path leads off between two towers into uncertainty. The moon is the realm of dream and illusion, of the unconscious and the unclear, of the fears and intuitions that stir once the sun is down. It asks the traveller to move carefully through confusion, trusting instinct where sight fails. And then, blessedly, the sun, numbered 19, rises full and warm and shines on a child in a garden. The plainest joy in the whole deck. The sun is happiness, clarity, vitality and success. The simple, radiant good that follows a long night. The card almost everyone is glad to see. Two remain, and they bring the journey to its close. Judgment, numbered 20, shows an angel sounding a trumpet while figures rise with their arms lifted, answering the call. It is awakening, renewal, and the summing up of a life. The moment of rising into a higher understanding, of hearing something and responding to it, of being reborn into a new stage of the self. And at the very summit stands the world, numbered 21, a single dancing figure within a great wreath, surrounded by the emblems of the four corners of creation. The world is completion, wholeness, fulfillment, the successful end of the journey. The integration of everything the fool has met into one harmonious whole. With the world, the long road that began in innocence reaches its accomplishment. And yet the dancer stands ready, mid-step, because every ending in the tarot is also the seed of a beginning, and the fool may always set out again. Below the great trumps spread the four suits, the 56 cards the modern occult tradition named the minor arcana. If the trumps tell the grand story of the soul's journey, the suits tell the countless small stories of ordinary days. Each suit is a world of its own, coloured by the nature of its emblem, and within each suit the numbered cards run a course, from the first pure spark of the ace to the fullness or the exhaustion of the 10. A little arc of development, repeated 4 times over. The suit of wands, sometimes called staves or rods or batons, is the suit of fire, and it governs energy, ambition, passion, creativity, and action. These are the cards of the will and the spirit, of the drive to do and to make and to become, of enterprise and adventure, and the restless heat that pushes a person out of the house and into the world to build something. When wands fill a reading, the matter at hand is one of motivation and effort, of projects and enthusiasms, of the spark of an idea and the energy to chase it. The suit begins with the Ace of Wands, a single sprouting branch offered like a torch, the pure first flame of inspiration, the raw potential of a new venture, or a fresh burst of passion, before anything at all has been done with it. From that spark, the suit unfolds through its stages. The early cards speak of the first stirrings of a plan and the courage to begin, of setting out and looking toward distant horizons with ambition. The middle of the suit brings both the triumphs and the struggles of pursuing a goal. The card of a hard-won early victory. The card of competition and rivalry, where several figures clash with their staves. The card of standing alone to defend what one has built. As the numbers climb, the fire grows more complicated, because energy pressed too far becomes strain, and the higher wands begin to carry the weight of the very ambition they express. There is a card of swift movement and of things rushing toward their conclusion, a flight of staves sailing through open air. And the suit ends with the 10 of Wands, a figure bowed and struggling under the load of 10 heavy staves he can barely see past. The image of ambition become overload, of taking on too much, of the exhaustion waiting at the end of the driven road. The suit of fire, across its whole arc, is the story of desire and effort, from the first bright spark to the heavy load. There is an older way of naming what this suit carries, drawn from the elemental system the occultists fixed onto the cards, and it is worth knowing because it runs through every modern deck. Each suit was matched to one of the 4 classical elements, the ancient building blocks of the world, and wands were given to fire. Fire is warmth and light and destruction. the element that drives and consumes. The temperament it named was the eager, restless, passionate sort of person, quick to act and quick to burn. To read a handful of wands as a handful of fire is to feel at once its energy and its danger, its power to create and its power to exhaust. It is worth remembering, too, that these cards are not fixed sentences but flexible images, and that the same card can lean bright or dark, depending on the question asked and the cards lying beside it. A wand that speaks of bold ambition in one spread may warn of recklessness in another, because fire warms a house and also burns it down. Read reversed, the wands often turn their heat inward or let it gutter out, so that the charging energy of the suit becomes hesitation, delay, a loss of nerve, the spark that will not quite catch. The suit of cups is the mirror opposite, the suit of water governing emotion, love, relationship, and the whole inner life of feeling. In the elemental scheme, the temperament of water is the feeling sort, soft, deep, easily moved, the person governed by the heart rather than the head. A spread heavy with cups carries that tidal weather with it. If wands are what we chase, cups are what we cherish, the bonds and the moods and the affections that give a life its warmth and its ache. The suit begins with the Ace of Cups, a single overflowing chalice, the pure wellspring of feeling, the first pouring of love or compassion or grace, the open heart before any particular attachment has shaped it. Through its stages, the suit tells the story of the emotional life in all its turns. The early cups are the happy ones, the card of two people pledging a bond to one another, the card of friends and community celebrating in a circle of raised cups. But water does not stay still, and the middle of the suit brings the shadows of feeling, the card of boredom and dissatisfaction, where a figure sits unmoved before the cups already offered, longing for something else. And above all, the card of grief, a cloaked figure standing over 3 spilled cups, mourning what has been lost, while 2 full cups still stand behind him, unnoticed. That single image holds one of the deepest lessons in the suit, that in sorrow we tend to see only what has spilled and to overlook what remains. Further on come the cards of memory and choice, the wistful card of looking back on the sweetness of the past, the card of a figure faced with a dazzle of cups and the temptation of too many wishes at once. And the suit rises through its higher numbers toward emotional fulfillment, the contented card of a wish come true. And at last, the 10 of Cups, a family beneath a great arc of 10 cups shining like a rainbow, the very image of lasting love and shared happiness, and a heart entirely at peace. Where the wands end in burden, the cups end in joy. The two suits together map the whole distance between what drives us and what fulfills us. The last 2 suits are the sharpest and the most solid, swords and coins, the suit of the mind and the suit of the world. Between them, they cover the 2 hardest realms of ordinary life, the realm of thought and conflict and truth, and the realm of money and work and the body. If wands are our energy and cups our feelings, then swords are our thoughts and coins are our circumstances. And a great deal of what troubles or steadies a life falls somewhere among them. The suit of swords is the suit of air, and it governs the mind, intellect, conflict, truth, and struggle. Of all 4, it is the most troubling, because a sword is a blade, and thought itself can wound as surely as it can clarify. These are the cards of ideas and decisions, of communication and argument, of the clarity that cuts through confusion and the cruelty that cuts through peace, of the worries and hard truths that turn over and over in a sleepless mind at 3 in the morning. The suit begins with the Ace of Swords, a single upright blade, often crowned, the pure power of the mind at its sharpest, the breakthrough of clear thought or hard truth, the double edge that can defend or destroy. Through its stages, the suit carries the reader across the harder passages of the inner life. There are cards of difficult choices made under strain, a blindfolded figure balancing two crossed swords, unable to see the way. There are cards of grief and worry, the pierced heart beneath a raining sky. The figure sitting up in bed with her face in her hands, while 9 swords hang on the wall behind her, the very picture of anxiety in the dark hours. There are cards of conflict and loss, of a defeat that must simply be accepted, of walking away from a field of trouble, carrying what one can. And the suit descends to its lowest point in the 10 of swords, a figure lying still beneath 10 blades. The image of an ending that feels total, of hitting the very bottom. And yet even there the tarot offers a mercy, because beyond the fallen figure a new day is breaking along the horizon. A hint that the worst, once reached, is also the turn toward recovery. The suit of air is the story of the mind under pressure, and its hard lesson is that most of its swords are wielded by our own thoughts. The suit of coins, called pentacles or discs in the occult decks, is the suit of earth, and it governs the material world. Money, work, the body, and all things solid and practical. Of the 4, it is the most grounded and, on the whole, the most reassuring, because it deals not with the storms of feeling or the wars of the mind, but with the steady business of building a life you can stand on. These are the cards of livelihood and property, of skill and craft and patient labor, of health and home and the slow accumulation of security. The suit begins with the Ace of Coins, a single golden disc held out like a gift, the pure seed of prosperity, the first offering of an opportunity in the material world. A new position, a new venture, a fresh chance at security. Its early cards show the beginnings of enterprise, the juggling of money and priorities, the careful labor of a craftsman learning and perfecting a skill. Its middle carries the suit's darkest note, a card of hardship and want, 2 ragged figures trudging through the snow past a lit and glowing window they cannot enter. The image of poverty and exclusion and hard times. And near it, the harder question of the miser, who hoards his coins and holds them too tightly to be of use to anyone. But the suit is fundamentally one of growth through patience, and it recovers. It shows the craftsman rewarded, the fruits of steady labor ripening, the garden coming into bloom. And it ends richer than any other suit, with the 10 of coins. An old man among his family and his dogs before a great house, all the coins of the suit scattered through the scene like light. The image of lasting wealth, established security, legacy, a prosperity that spans generations. Where swords end in a fall, and wands in a burden, and cups in joy, coins end in abundance. The settled inheritance of a life well built. In the elemental scheme the occultists laid over the deck, swords were given to air and coins to earth, and the match is a fitting one. Air is the element of the mind, invisible, quick, and everywhere at once, the stuff of thought and word and reason, and the sword suit carries that restless, cutting quality, brilliant when clear, cruel when turned against the self. Earth is the element of the solid world, slow, heavy, enduring, the ground beneath the feet and the body itself. And the coin suit carries that patient material steadiness, the slowest of the 4 to change and the surest to reward long effort. To feel the 4 elements moving through the suits, fire and water and air and earth, is to hold a small model of the whole world in one deck. That ancient idea that everything there is comes from the mingling of these 4. There is a special place in each suit for its ace, the single mark that begins it, and the occult tradition treated the 4 aces as more than ordinary cards. Each was seen as the pure root and seed of its element, the concentrated essence of fire or water or air or earth, before it has flowed out into all the numbered cards below. So the Ace of Wands is fire itself. The Ace of Cups, water itself, the Ace of Swords, air itself, the Ace of Coins, earth itself. When an ace appears in a reading, it often marks a true beginning, the gift of a whole new current entering a life. Together, the 4 suits form a complete portrait of ordinary human experience, the fire of our ambitions, the water of our feelings, the air of our thoughts, the earth of our circumstances. But each is worth meeting one card at a time, because every one of the 40 numbered cards carries its own small meaning. The suit of wands opens with the ace, a single leafing branch offered out of a cloud like a torch. It is the pure spark, the first flash of inspiration at the very instant it catches, before anything has been done with it. It promises raw energy, and it invites the reader to seize the moment and begin. The two of wands shows a figure standing on a height with a small globe in his hand, looking out past the land he already holds toward the wider world beyond. It is the card of planning and first choices, of a person who has made a small success and now weighs a larger ambition. It speaks of foresight, of standing at the threshold of a bigger venture and deciding whether to step out into it. The Three of Wands carries that decision forward, showing the figure from behind as he gazes out to sea where his ships are already sailing. It is the card of expansion and of patience rewarded, of enterprise set in motion and the confident wait for it to bear fruit. The horizon watched with hope. The Four of Wands shows four staves raised like the posts of a flowered canopy, with figures celebrating beneath it. It is the happiest of the early ones, the card of homecoming and celebration, of a milestone reached and marked with joy, a wedding, a harvest, a safe return, a moment of harmony and belonging before the work resumes. Then the mood shifts with the Five of Wands, where several youths brandish their staves in what looks half a brawl and half a game. It is the card of conflict and competition, of clashing energies and rivalries, though usually the noisy kind rather than the dangerous kind, the friction of many wills pushing at once, and the useful sharpening that can come from testing yourself against others. The Six of Wands restores the light, showing a rider crowned with laurel, his wand raised, a crowd around him. It is the card of victory and public recognition, of success acknowledged and reward earned after the struggle of the five, a moment of well-deserved confidence. The Seven of Wands shows a lone figure on higher ground, defending himself with his staff against unseen challengers below. It is the card of standing one's ground, of holding a hard-won position against competition, of the determination to keep what you have built when others would contest it. The Eight of Wands shows 8 staves flying together through open air, the one card of the suit with no human figure at all. It is the card of swift movement and rapid change, of news arriving and messages sent, of events long delayed suddenly rushing to their conclusion. It speaks of momentum, of a time when everything moves at once. The Nine of Wands shows a weary, wounded figure leaning on his staff with the other 8 ranged behind him like a fence. It is the card of resilience and of the last stand, a person tired and battered but still upright, braced for one more push, guarding what has cost so much through the final and hardest stretch. The suit ends with the 10, a man bent double under the weight of all 10 staves, struggling toward a house in the distance. It is the card of burden and overload, of ambition grown into a load too heavy to carry. It closes the fiery suit on a note of quiet caution. That drive without limit ends in exhaustion, and that some burdens are meant to be set down rather than carried all the way to the door. From the bright spark of the ace to the heavy load of the 10, the wands tell the whole story of wanting something and chasing it. The Suit of Cups, taken card by card, tells the story of the heart across an entire life of feeling, from the first pouring of love to the settled peace of a happy home. It begins with the Ace of Cups, a single chalice overflowing with water, a dove descending toward it. It is the pure wellspring of emotion, the first rush of love or compassion or joy, a new relationship or a deep feeling opening at its very source. One of the most tender and hopeful cards in the whole deck. The Two of Cups shows a man and a woman facing one another, each raising a cup, exchanging a pledge. It is the card of partnership and mutual attraction, of a bond formed between two people, love or friendship met and answered, the meeting of equals. The Three of Cups widens that bond into a circle, showing 3 figures dancing with their cups lifted in a toast amid a harvest. It is the card of friendship and community, of celebration shared, of the simple happiness of good company and of belonging somewhere. The Four of Cups shows a figure sitting apart beneath a tree, arms folded, gazing at 3 cups in front of him, while a fourth is offered out of a cloud he does not notice. It is the card of discontent and apathy, of boredom and emotional withdrawal, of a person so absorbed in what dissatisfies them that they overlook a gift being held out at their elbow. Then comes the deepest sorrow of the suit, the 5 of Cups. A cloaked figure standing with bowed head over 3 spilled cups, while 2 full cups still stand behind him, unseen. It is the card of grief and regret, of loss dwelt upon, and it carries the suit's hardest lesson, that in mourning what is gone, we so often fail to see what is still standing. The 6 of Cups turns gently backward in time, showing a child offering a flower-filled cup to another in a peaceful old courtyard. It is the card of nostalgia and memory, of childhood and innocence, of sweet recollection, and sometimes of a reunion with someone from long ago. The 7 of Cups shows a figure faced with 7 cups floating in a cloud, each holding a different prize: a jewel, a wreath, a dragon, a shrouded, shining shape. It is the card of choices and illusion, of dreams and temptations and far too many options, of wishful thinking that must be sorted from what is real before any true choice can be made. The 8 of Cups shows a figure walking away beneath a moon, his back turned on 8 neatly stacked cups, heading toward distant mountains. It is the card of leaving something behind, of turning away from what no longer satisfies the heart in search of something deeper, even at the cost of everything already built. The 9 of Cups shows a well-fed man seated with his arms crossed and a satisfied smile before an ark of 9 cups. It is the card of contentment and emotional satisfaction, long known as the wish card, the sign of a heart's desire fulfilled and of a moment of real and earned pleasure. The suit closes with the 10 of Cups, a couple standing with arms raised beside their children, while 10 cups shine in an arc across the sky like a rainbow. It is the card of lasting happiness and emotional fulfillment, of family and harmony and love that has found its home, the peaceful completion of everything the suit set out to find. From the first pouring of the ace to the shining arc of the 10, the cups map the whole distance a heart can travel. The suit of swords, read 1 card at a time, is the hardest journey in the deck, because it follows the mind through its struggles, from the first clear stroke of truth down into the depths and out again toward the dawn. It opens with the Ace of Swords, a single upright blade rising from a cloud, crowned at its tip. The pure power of the mind at its sharpest, the breakthrough of clear thought, the cutting truth, the decisive idea that slices through confusion. Like every sword, it is double-edged, able to defend or to wound, but at its best, it is the moment when the fog lifts and the truth simply stands there, plain. The 2 of Swords shows a blindfolded figure seated by the sea, 2 swords crossed over her chest, balanced but unable to see. It is the card of stalemate and difficult choice, of a decision avoided or a truth not yet faced, a mind held in tense and blindfolded balance. The 3 of Swords is starker still, a single heart pierced by 3 blades beneath a grey and raining sky. It is the card of heartbreak and sorrow, of painful truth spoken aloud, of grief that cannot be softened, one of the plainest images of hurt anywhere in the deck. After such pain comes the 4 of Swords, a figure lying still as if resting upon a tomb, 3 swords on the wall above and 1 beneath. It is the card of rest and recovery, of retreat and healing, of a needed pause to gather strength after a wound, the quiet before returning to the struggle. The 5 of Swords shows a figure gathering up swords with a smirk, while 2 others walk away, shoulders down, defeated. It is the card of conflict and hollow victory, of winning at too high a cost, of discord and wounded pride, and a reminder that not every battle worth winning is worth the fighting. The 6 of Swords shows a ferryman poling a small boat across the water toward a calmer shore, carrying a cloaked passenger and a child. 6 swords standing upright in the hull. It is the card of transition and moving on, of leaving trouble behind for gentler water, a difficult passage undertaken toward recovery. The Seven of Swords shows a figure creeping away from a camp with 5 swords in his arms, glancing back over his shoulder, 2 swords left behind. It is the card of stealth and deception, of strategy and getting away with something, of acting alone and not quite honestly, whether against others or in a plan best kept quiet. The Eight of Swords shows a bound and blindfolded figure surrounded by a cage of 8 upright blades, though the way out is not truly closed. It is the card of restriction and of feeling trapped, of a prison largely of the mind's own making, of a powerlessness that would ease the moment the blindfold came off. The Nine of Swords shows a figure sitting up in bed in the dark, face buried in her hands, 9 swords hanging on the wall behind her. It is the card of anxiety and anguish, of worry and sleepless dread, of the fears that grow monstrous in the small hours and shrink again by morning, larger in the mind than they ever were in the world. The suit sinks to its lowest point in the Ten of Swords, a figure lying face down beneath all 10 blades, an image of total defeat, of painful ending, of hitting the very bottom. And yet even here the tarot keeps its quiet mercy, because beyond the fallen figure, a golden dawn is breaking along the edge of the sky. The promise that the worst, once fully reached, is also the turning point. From the clear blade of the ace to the black night and breaking dawn of the 10, the swords trace the mind through every one of its troubles, and their hard comfort is that most of these blades are wielded by our own thoughts, and so may also be laid down. The suit of coins, walked card by card, is the steadiest and most reassuring of the 4, following the long, patient work of building a life in the solid world. It begins with the Ace of Coins, a single golden disc held out of a cloud above a green garden with a gateway beyond it. The pure seed of prosperity, the first offering of an opportunity in the material world, a new position, a new venture, a fresh chance at security or at health, the promise of something solid waiting to be grown. The Two of Coins shows a young man dancing as he juggles 2 coins linked by a looping ribbon, ships riding the waves behind him. It is the card of balance and adaptability, of juggling money and time and priorities, of keeping several demands in the air at once with a certain light-footed grace. The Three of Coins shows a craftsman at work inside a church, consulting with 2 others who hold the plans. It is the card of skill and teamwork, of craftsmanship recognized and collaboration bearing fruit, the early stage of building something real with the help of other hands. The Four of Coins shows a figure clutching 1 coin tightly to his chest, standing on another, a third pressed against his crown. It is the card of holding on, of security guarded perhaps too jealously, of saving and control shading into possessiveness and the fear of loss. A reminder that a grip held too tight becomes a cage. The Five of Coins carries the suit's darkest note. 2 ragged, limping figures passing through snow beneath a lit, stained glass window they cannot enter. It is the card of hardship and want, of poverty and ill health and exclusion, of hard times, and quietly, of help standing very close by, if only one could find the door. The Six of Coins shows a merchant holding a balance and giving alms to 2 kneeling beggars. It is the card of generosity, of giving and receiving, of charity and the fair flow of resources between those who have and those who need. A moment of balance restored. The Seven of Coins shows a farmer leaning on his hoe, gazing at a flourishing vine heavy with coins, pausing to consider his crop. It is the card of patience and assessment, of the long wait for growth, of stepping back to weigh whether an effort is worth continuing before the harvest comes in. The Eight of Coins shows a craftsman bent over his bench, carefully stamping coin after coin, each finished piece hung on the wall beside him. It is the card of diligence and skill, of the patient labor of learning a craft and perfecting it, of mastery earned through steady, repeated, unglamorous work. The Nine of Coins shows a poised and elegant woman standing alone in a lush garden of grapevines, a falcon resting on her gloved hand. It is the card of abundance and self-sufficiency, of refined comfort and independence, of enjoying the fruits of one's own long labor in peace and on one's own terms. The suit closes richer than any other with the 10 of Coins. An old man among his family and his dogs before the arch of a great house. All 10 coins arranged across the scene like windows. It is the card of lasting wealth and legacy, of established security, inheritance, and a prosperity that spans generations. The settled abundance of a life patiently built, where the wands ended in burden, and the swords in a fall, and the cups in joy. The coins end in a home, and in a name that will outlast the one who made it. With that, the 40 numbered cards are complete. Every ace through 10 in all 4 suits, named and understood. Only the courts remain. Every suit is crowned by its court, and the courts of the tarot are its people. 16 figures who bring the abstract energies of the suits to life as characters, personalities, human faces. 4 in each suit, ranked from youngest to most commanding. The page, the knight, the queen, and the king. Each rank carries its own quality, no matter which suit it belongs to, while each suit colours its 4 courtiers with its own nature. Learning to read the courts is often the hardest part of learning the tarot, because these cards may stand for actual people in the reader's life, or for aspects of the reader's own self, or simply for the mood and manner of a situation. Telling which is a matter of feel rather than of rule. But the 4 ranks give a steady frame. The pages of the youngest, carrying the quality of beginning, of youth, of the fresh and unformed. A page is a student, a messenger, a child of the suit, full of curiosity and promise but not yet grown into mastery. So the Page of Wands is the young enthusiast, bursting with ideas and eager to start. The Page of Cups is the tender-hearted dreamer, open and sensitive and imaginative. The Page of Swords is the sharp and curious youth, quick-minded and watchful and hungry to learn, though sometimes given to gossip and small mischief. And the Page of Coins is the diligent apprentice, bent seriously over a craft, dependable and willing. Wherever a page appears, something in the suit is young and only just beginning. A person, a project, or a part of oneself. The knights are the court in motion, the riders. They carry the quality of action, drive, and extremity. Where the page is a beginning, the knight is a force in full pursuit, each one taking the energy of his suit to its most active, and often its most excessive pitch. The Knight of Wands charges forward on a rearing horse, all fire and daring and impatience, the adventurer who acts well before he thinks. The Knight of Cups rides gently forward, bearing his cup like an offering, the romantic and the idealist, the bringer of proposals and dreams. The Knight of Swords gallops headlong into the wind with his sword raised, the very image of rushing, single-minded action, brilliant and reckless at once. And the Knight of Coins, by contrast, sits quite still upon a motionless horse, because the earth suit slows even its rider. He is the steady, patient, methodical worker who moves slowly and never stops until the task is finished. The queens are the matured power of each suit, carrying the quality of inner mastery, of understanding and nurture, of holding the suit's energy in a deep and settled way. A queen does not chase her suit as a knight does, she embodies it from within. The Queen of Wands is warm and confident and magnetic, full of an energy that draws others toward her. The Queen of Cups is the most loving and intuitive of all the courts, gentle and compassionate, and deeply attuned to feeling, the great nurturer of the deck. The Queen of Swords is clear-eyed and honest, sharp of mind and independent, a woman who has known sorrow and turned it into wisdom, and who will not be deceived twice. And the Queen of Coins is generous and practical in the fullest sense, nurturing in a grounded and material way, tending her household and her garden, and everyone in her care with a steady abundance. The kings are the court at its full outward power, carrying the quality of mastery, authority, and command. Where the queen holds her suit inwardly, the king directs it outward into the world. The King of Wands is the bold, visionary leader, the entrepreneur and the commander, full of drive and able to make others want to follow. The King of Cups is the master of feeling who rules his emotions rather than being ruled by them, calm and diplomatic and kind, the wise counselor who keeps his balance in troubled water. The King of Swords is intellect and authority in their clearest form, the judge, the strategist, the ruler who governs by reason and law and speaks the hard truth without flinching. And the King of Coins is the master of the material world, the established man of wealth and business, generous and reliable, the provider who has built something solid and can be trusted to keep it standing. The courts are also where the tarot most clearly shows its descent from the ordinary playing deck, and where the two parted company. The common deck most of the world uses kept only 3 court figures, the Jack, the Queen, and the King, having dropped the mounted knight somewhere along the road and folded his role into the Jack. The tarot kept all 4, which is one of the small structural differences that give a tarot deck away at a glance. Some modern decks rename these ranks to suit their theme, calling them princes and princesses, or daughters and sons, or titles of their own invention, and the occult decks in particular reshuffled the courts to fit their elemental schemes. But beneath the varying names, the idea holds steady. A little household of 4 figures in each suit, rising from youth to full command. Read together, the 16 form a kind of gallery of human types, the whole range of ways a person can meet the world, from the eager youth to the driving doer, to the wise nurturer, to the settled ruler, each in the flavour of fire, water, air, or earth. In a reading they may point to particular people, a fiery friend glimpsed in the Knight of Wands, a loving mother in the Queen of Cups, a stern authority in the King of Swords. Or they may turn and reflect the reader back to themselves, naming the quality the moment asks for, or the role the reader has been playing without noticing. They are the most human cards in the deck and the most flexible, and learning to hear which voice they are speaking in is a great deal of the art. With the courts, the tour of all 78 is complete. The 22 trumps of the great journey and the 56 suit cards of daily life. Only one thing remains, which is how all of them are actually brought together, and why, after so many centuries, people still turn them over at all. To read the tarot is, at its simplest, to shuffle the 78 cards, lay some of them out in a chosen pattern, and interpret them together in the light of a question. The pattern is called a spread, and each position within it is given a meaning, so that the same card says something a little different depending on where it falls. The art lies in weaving the individual meanings into a single coherent story that speaks to the matter at hand, and it rewards both knowledge and intuition. Both the learned meanings and the reader's own sense of how they fit together in this particular moment. A reading is less like looking up an answer in a book, and more like telling a story from a handful of pictures dealt at random, trusting that the pattern will turn out to mean something. The spreads themselves run from the very simple to the elaborate. The most common of all is the 3-card spread. 3 cards laid in a row, most often read as past, present, and future. A quick and flexible way to see the shape of a situation and where it seems to be heading. Its simplicity is its strength. 3 cards tell a clear story without overwhelming anyone, and the 3 positions bend to almost any question. Situation and obstacle and advice. Mind and body and spirit, whatever the evening needs. Beyond it lies the most famous of the complex layouts, the Celtic cross. 10 cards built up into a cross and a staff, each position naming a different facet of the question, the heart of the matter, the challenge crossing it, the roots in the past, the hopes and the fears, the likely outcome. It gives a rich and detailed reading, and it has been the grand set piece of tarot practice for over a century, printed in nearly every guidebook, learned by nearly every reader. There is also the old question of reversed cards, the ones that fall upside down in a spread. Many readers hold that a card's meaning shifts when reversed, weakening or blocking or turning inward the meaning it carries upright, so that the joyful sun reversed might speak of a happiness delayed or clouded, and the burdened 10 of Wands reversed might speak of a load about to be set down at last. Other readers ignore reversals entirely, reading every card upright and finding the full range of its meaning, light and shadow both, already present in the single image. There is no single correct way, and this is true of tarot practice generally, because it has never had a governing authority or an official rule book. Every reader eventually develops a personal method, a way of shuffling and laying out and interpreting that feels true to them, and the tradition is broad enough to hold them all. What a reading is understood to do has shifted greatly across the centuries, as this whole long history has shown, and today it is understood in more ways than one. Some still approach the cards as a genuine oracle, a means of glimpsing what is coming, or of receiving guidance from beyond the ordinary self. Far more, in the modern world, approach them as a tool for reflection, a structured way of thinking about a situation, of drawing out one's own buried feelings and half-known thoughts by seeing them mirrored in a picture. In this understanding, the tarot does not predict the future so much as illuminate the present, offering not fate, but perspective. A prompt for honest self-examination, dressed in beautiful and ancient images. The cards become a mirror held up to the mind, and the wisdom they reveal is the reader's own, brought to the surface by the simple act of looking. Not every reading is an elaborate affair. Many people who keep the tarot in their lives use it in the humblest possible way, drawing a single card in the morning as a kind of quiet question put to the day, a small prompt for thought rather than a prophecy. One card considered slowly can be a rich thing, an image to carry through the hours and to measure the day against. Others use the cards to think through a decision, laying one card for each path before them and sitting with whatever the pictures stir up. The tarot bends easily to these small uses, and for a great many modern readers, this gentle, everyday practice, one card and a few minutes of quiet, is the whole of what the cards are for. Something closer to keeping a journal than to summoning the future. It is worth asking, at the end of so long a history, why these particular cards endured when countless other games and fashions and systems of divination have come and gone without a trace. Part of the answer is the sheer richness of the images. That gallery of the Fool and the Emperor and Death and the Star and the Lovers, figures deep enough and open enough to carry an endless wealth of meaning, to speak to any life in any century. Part of it is the structure, that clever architecture of 4 suits and 22 trumps that somehow manages to feel like a complete map of experience, with the grand journey of the soul above and the small dramas of daily life below. And part of it is simply that human beings have always wanted a way to step outside the rush of their own thoughts and look at their lives from a little distance. The tarot, whatever one believes about it, offers exactly that. A quiet ritual of laying out cards and then looking. The deck that survives into our own night carries the whole of its long past folded inside it. In its 4 suits, it holds the memory of the Mamluk cards and the polo sticks of Persia, still there in the wands, still forgetting what they were. In its trumps it holds the pageantry of the Italian courts and the slow parade of Petrarch's triumphs rolling through a street. In its printed images it holds the woodblocks of Marseilles and the flat, stenciled colours of workshops long since closed. In its mysteries, the dream of Egypt that a Frenchman conjured out of nothing at an evening party. In its correspondences, the grand system of Levi and the candlelit temples of the Golden Dawn. And in its beloved pictures, the genius of a young artist named Pamela Coleman Smith, who taught the cards how to tell their stories and was never paid what she was owed. Few objects so small have gathered up so much. Passing from the hands of dukes to the hands of magicians to the hands of ordinary seekers, changing its meaning at every stage and keeping all the while its same familiar face. From a slip of Chinese paper to a mirror of the modern soul, the tarot has travelled a very long way. And it is still travelling tonight, laid out on tables all over the world, 78 small pictures that people cannot quite stop turning over. If you are somehow still awake, that is perfectly all right. There is nothing left to do now and nothing left to follow. The story has finished telling itself. If you would like to keep drifting, there is another quiet journey waiting on the screen whenever you want it, ready to carry you gently onward. And if this one kept you company for a while, it helps more than you know if you leave a small thought below or a like, so that this lamp can stay lit for the next person who cannot sleep. For now, though, let all of it go. The Swiss clerk with his ban and his cold ink, the gold leaf catching the light in a Milanese hall, the polo sticks that became plain wood, the printers in Marseilles with their stained fingers, the scholar who saw Egypt where there was none, the painter in her London studio giving each small card its little scene. They are all resting now, every one of them, as you are about to. Let your body grow heavy and still. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your hands unclench and open. Let the bed take all of your weight so that you are holding nothing at all. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow and lengthen and slow again. The cards are back in their soft old box, face down, in order, waiting for a day that has not come yet. Nothing is being asked of you tonight. Nothing needs deciding, and nothing needs remembering. Sleep now, and sweet dreams.